Alexander.
Here.
Mr. Byler.
Here.
Mr. Claxton.
Here.
Dr. Coker.
Here.
Mr. Corley is excused. Mr. DeVilliers.
Here.
Dr. Fountain.
Here.
Dr. Goree.
Here.
Dr. Gray.
Here.
Mr. Javia.
Here.
Mr. Jenkins.
Here.
Dr. Joffrion.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Dr. Joseph. Mr. Kennedy.
Here.
Mr. Martin.
Here.
Dr. Narcisse. Dr. Ortling.
Here.
Mr. Powell is excused. Ms. Trosclair is excused. Dr. Williams.
Here.
And Mr. Williams. All right, we have a quorum.
You're right.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. Good seeing everyone. It's been a little while. Before we begin, I want to recognize some of our guests this morning. We have a few best board members this morning. We have Ms. Doris Boucher is here. Mr. Ronnie Morris is here. Dr. Belinda Davis and Dr. Holly Buffett. Thank you for coming. Also, before we begin, just want to recognize a few of our colleagues that will be retiring and are transitioning to bigger and better things next year. And so we just want to thank them for their service to our children in Louisiana and in their respective communities. And so we'd like to recognize Mr. David Alexander from Ascension Parish for his service that will be retiring this year. Also, we want to recognize Dr. Don Coker from Washington Parish for his service. Also, Mr. Scott DeVilliers from Zachary Community Schools. And Dr. Arthur Jeffrey from Iberia Parish. I say that wrong every time. One day I'll get it right. And I will be transitioning as well. So again, thank you guys for everything that's been around. An honor as the chair of the advisory council. So thank you. Approval of minutes.
Motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second by Dr. Avis Williams. Any opposed? Motion passed. New business. 3.1, consideration of an update report regarding math refresh.
Motion to receive.
Motion to receive. Have a motion to receive by Dr. Copeland.
Second.
Have a second by Dr. Jeffrey. Any opposition?
No.
Oh, excuse me. Superintendent Brown.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. First of all, I guess I'm the only one that got the note that it's National Seersucker Day. I'll be sure and send out advance notice next year to the group. I'm not sure if it's more dangerous to be in here or over at the Capitol, but I'm going to go over the Capitol momentarily because we have several items that are still pending, namely one of great interest to this room, and that's teacher pay. And today is the last day of the legislative session, and they must conclude by 6 p.m. So I'm going to step away momentarily to be over there. Dr. Chasson is going to present some exciting information about our math refresh in the same way that we've worked through literacy together. I would certainly say together over the last 3 years, and have seen really good and positive results and good opportunity to keep moving forward. Math has been something that we knew that we also wanted to get to, and we wanted to mirror those same approaches. There was just only so much that we and you and everyone had the capacity to do at once. And so we're excited to start rolling out that suite of math shifts, particularly around foundational numeracy and number sense. And so Dr. Chasson will present on that. But also, before I leave, I wanted to call out too something that we are exceptionally excited about leading. And you'll see that later in the agenda. Meredith Jordan will present. But this is a new playbook for special education in our state for our diverse learners. And we know that for For too long, we have wanted to do better for our students with exceptionalities. And we are, again, beginning that process of trying to rethink what special education programming could look like across the state. We're more or less saying that it is an expectation that we all do better. We had your special education directors with us at Teacher Leader Summit last week to walk through the playbook with them. It was crafted in conjunction with many of them to think about some of the most important elements of serving our students with exceptionalities. And so I just ask that when Meredith presents that, that you have an open mind and you offer constructive feedback to what that plan is looking like, because it really will shape what the next period of time looks like for us as we work with our diverse learners. And we certainly want to get better in that space, and this is really a coordinated effort to try to do better in that space. And some of the things that we're doing that you may have been a part of, or your team may have been part of, is getting back together the network of special education leaders. They're starting to meet more regularly, trying to cultivate a new set of special education leaders, aspiring special education leaders, and many of your leaders might actually be helping us to lead that program, the playbook, and then a couple of other things are coming out around special ed. We want to target our students with exceptionalities moving forward in a way that hopefully will be more fruitful for their academic outcomes. So I just want to share that before I leave and ask that you give feedback to Meredith along the way. You're in good hands because our Chief of Staff, Mr. Ken Bradford, is going to be leading out this morning in my place, and Dr. Chasson, up to you.
Thanks, Dr. Brumley. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So I'm happy to bring you all some information about our math refresh. And I wanted to, first of all, just acknowledge two folks in the room so that you can put a face with a name. But we have Ms. Sharon Nikes, who leads our academic content team. So Sharon oversees all of our content areas, curriculum, standards, curriculum implementation work, our instructional materials review process, and so she oversees the work of that team. But we also have a new director of math, and that is Jamie Abair. Jamie has been at the department the last few years, but prior to that, led math in Lafayette Parish and saw some really great results there in Lafayette. And so really excited to have Jamie as our new director of math. So just wanted to make sure that you can put a name to a face, know Jamie, know where she is coming from, and that she and our math team are available to support with any of this math refresh work as we think about transitions in math and how to best serve our students. The team is absolutely available to consult. A lot of you have really leaned heavily the last several years on our literacy team, and that partnership has really been amazing. Our literacy team loves to be out in the field, loves to support all of you with your literacy implementation and strengthening those literacy plans. And so our math team is available now to do the same thing around this math refresh initiative. So just wanted to make sure that you all know Jamie and where you can reach out and how you can reach out for more support in this math work. Our math refresh is really grounded in 4 key pillars, similar to our literacy work. Again, Dr. Brumley mentioned that we have tackled literacy so carefully and so intentionally these last 3 years. We are now continuing our literacy strategy work, but also branching into math, knowing how much attention math needs in our state. And so these 4 key pillars are designed similarly to our literacy pillars. The first of which is recognizing the importance of our high-impact structures designed to prioritize access to grade-level math, and that not just prioritize access to grade-level math, but setting students up for success in accessing grade-level math. Just-in-time proactive intervention, once again recognizing that all students have individualized needs and recognizing that we need to address those individual needs. We know that that is a heavy lift for our educators. So recognizing the importance of ongoing support for our teachers through collaboration and high-quality professional learning. And also acknowledging, of course, the ever-important role of our families and our stakeholders as they support our work. So I wanted to let you all know of some of the resources that we have created around math and some that we are currently in development with and will be releasing over the next several months. So we have a few things that have transpired so far. We've released some funding via Super App for new materials. This is recognizing that A good bit of our state was using the traditional Eureka math curriculum. And so recognizing that folks really were making that shift as those materials archive, and we've done a review through our instructional materials review process of Eureka Math Squared, and realizing that many of you all have had a decision to make about what materials to turn to next on our Tier 1 list. And so many of you all have made those decisions and either made a transition this past year or are making a transition next year. So again, that's something we're happy to support you all with, and we've released some funding to do that work. We've also provided statewide Zern access, and I'll talk a little more about Zern on the next slide, but also letting you all know that we are releasing a Math Refresh Leader Toolkit in the months to come, which is really going to be designed to support math leadership at both the school and school system level. This is something that we've really relied on heavily with our literacy improvement work, knowing that we can train our teachers in best practices, we can provide them with resources, but we can't leave our leaders behind. And so we need our leaders to know how to support educators, how to talk with them about the work, how to provide them with resources, what to be looking for in classrooms. And so that's what that Math Refresh Leader Toolkit is really going to entail. We've also begun this week a summer webinar series for leaders. So this is applicable here on this slide. It's something that you've seen released in our newsletter. But asking our school system and school leaders to join this webinar series once again so that they can be on the front end of receiving information about improvements in math. So a little more about Zern. 2 weeks ago, we were really thrilled to learn the results of an impact study around Zern for Louisiana students. So Zern has conducted an impact study in a few other states, but we really wanted a Zern impact study here in Louisiana. One of the reasons that we really began a partnership with Zern was because of the impact studies that we saw from other states, and we saw the great impact that Zern was having on student results. We wanted to do the same thing here in Louisiana because we wanted to test those outcomes against our assessment and our students. And so 31 Louisiana school systems partnered with Zern to study the impact of Zern on about 14,000 Louisiana students. And you can see some of the key findings here on this slide. The first of which is elementary and middle school students who consistently used Zern scored significantly higher on the 2022 LEAP than their matched peers who did not use Zern Math. And this was true across subgroups. Another key finding to call out is that the impact was greatest for Louisiana students not yet meeting mastery. Consistent Zern Math usage led to 1.5 to 2 years of math learning gains in just one academic year. So this means that every student who was a part of the study had a matched peer that tried to remove any other contributing factors to what could have impacted their score on LEAP between 21 and 22 LEAP administration. And so what the findings are is that there was an impact on all students who used Zern, even at those higher levels, but the greatest impact was for those students who weren't yet at mastery. So those students more typically that we have the most challenge in moving sometimes saw some of the greatest growth. In fact, 70% of students at the lowest levels of math achievement, those students scoring unsatisfactory, improved their achievement level when they consistently use Zern, compared to just 45% of students at the same starting level who did not use Zern. So 70% of students who were scoring unsatisfactory in 2021 and used Zern moved up at least by one achievement level in the next year. So those are some pretty amazing results and just something that I wanted to provide to you all today. We have released the entirety of the study with some more findings and some more data points, but I wanted to just bring some of these most important ones to you all today. So a few more resources to note. Specifically around learning acceleration, we have produced some resources. Many of you all are already familiar with our Accelerate Math resources that we've made the last few years, really meant to be exemplary resources for teachers to use during intervention or tutoring time to accelerate learning around mathematics. We've also produced some guidance on accelerating learning in high school. High school is something that has garnered a lot of attention around math. We know that we have a lot of room to grow in our high school math achievement. We've also produced that second bullet there, best practices for accelerating math learning. This is guidance that really clearly articulates what we should see in classrooms to accelerate math learning and what are the things we really want to steer clear of. And again, just like a few years ago, I presented to this advisory council and got very transparent about literacy and said there are some practices called 3Qing that we really don't want to see in classrooms because we know it's not what's best for kids. This guidance document really calls out what are some of the practices around mathematics that may be historical, institutional in nature. There may be things that are very entrenched in our classrooms that we want to really steer clear of because we don't have evidence showing that that's what's best for kids. So this guidance document gets a little bold and calls some of these things out very explicitly. I also want to just mention our FLAME resources that are currently under development. So FLAME stands for Foundational Lessons to Accelerate Math Education. This comes from a lot of feedback from our teachers and from us recognizing that our students need more practice with foundational skills. It's in the curriculum, but they tell us it's not in there enough. We need more, our kids need more practice. This is something that I'm sure many of you have heard from your teachers, from your supervisors. It's something I've heard for years from teachers. And so these FLAME resources that we are currently designing will provide activities designed to build students' grade level fluency and tools for teachers to formatively assess fluency and communicate that with parents. And then our leader toolkit will also include leader-facing guidance. And so just wanted to call out that FLAME, those FLAME resources. This is similar, you all have heard us talk about LIFT and FIRE for literacy, these resources that we've created with our teacher leader advisors, with our team here at the department, to really push out great resources that, quite frankly, we haven't yet found in the field. And so we've decided to produce them ourselves. Something similarly is happening here with FLAME. We have decided to produce this ourselves and push into the field because we want teachers to have access to additional resources for fluency practice and building. On the professional learning front, I know that I already mentioned the webinar for leaders, so there will be lots more opportunities for professional development over the year to come. We're also developing out some additional professional learning roadmap resources that will be linked in our next iteration of our roadmap and released in the fall. But I also wanted to mention to you all today two really important pieces of legislation around numeracy that have made their way through this past legislative session. The first of which is Senate Bill 163. Senate Bill 163 is a required training for 4th through 8th grade math teachers that will be focused on foundational numeracy skills instruction, the vertical alignment of mathematical concepts that lead to algebra and geometry, building positive math dispositions, and connecting to HQIM implementation. So this math training is going to be required for 4th through 8th grade math teachers. There is a delay on the legislation, meaning that the requirement is not for this upcoming year, but for the following year. This does two things. It allows time for development of the training. It is not as simple as literacy, where there are already existing trainings. We knew for literacy there were some things out there that we knew were already high quality around the science of reading. For mathematics, we need to develop the training because there isn't something out there yet that is high quality enough to be deserving of our Louisiana teachers, and we want to make sure it's very aligned to our Louisiana standards and what our teachers need. The delay also ensures that you all have time to prepare as a school system. You'll have this next year to think about your schedule, your calendar, how this will fit for your teachers, and how to best implement this in your own school system. So we'll be rolling out more guidance and resources to support you all with that over the next year, but we do have time for it. The other change that we see in legislation was House Bill 326, which means that we, as a department, will be working with our teacher preparation providers to ensure our pre-service teachers are receiving the necessary training and entering classrooms ready to teach. So again, similarly to literacy, where we knew we had to address existing teachers, we also knew we had to address our teacher preparation programs. The same thing is happening here, where these two bills are really working together. Senate Bill 163 is working on our existing teachers and the training that they need. And House Bill 326 is meant for our pre-service teachers and embedding that into coursework so that Senate Bill 163 and that training does not have to live through the course of time, that we're really tackling this through our pre-service education. And finally, just wanted to address that last pillar around really seeing families as our partners. You all may have seen that we released a summer family engagement toolkit. We are super pleased with this toolkit. It just came out fantastic. It is meant to be a resource for your communications folks at the system level, for your school level communication people. I know a lot of times you have a teacher or an assistant principal running a Facebook account for a school. They need access to this toolkit. This toolkit provides both literacy and math resources. We tried to make it really easy, so it is copy and pasteable onto social media posts, but lots of great resources in this toolkit for families to engage in literacy and math activities. We have a lot in there about Zern and about supporting families with summer Zern use, but if you're not using Zern, or if you, for whatever reason, don't want to encourage that over the summer, there are other great math resources too, and math activities that can be done, simple things that can be done in home with families to really bridge that summer learning that we all know is so important. We also are starting to release some grab-and-go family resources. These are great things to have at open house or at any family nights. We have these for both literacy, and now we're developing them out for math as well. I also wanted to mention our Steve Carter Literacy Tutoring Program here now while I had a chance with you all. I've talked to you about Steve Carter a few times now at this advisory council, but just want to remind you once again about that $1,000 digital tutoring voucher that children have access if they have scored below grade level. All the family needs is that student ID, and they need to put in their zip code. The website is LouisianaTutoringInitiative.com. And it's very easy for a family to put that in and find what tutoring providers are available. We're up to 43 tutoring providers across the state, which is fantastic. We're increasing this every few months. I had come to you all a few months ago and asked you to help us find tutoring providers. Y'all did an excellent job with that. We have a lot more in-person. We don't have in-person providers everywhere across the state yet, but we do have virtual tutoring available everywhere across the state at this point. So just want to remind you about Steve Carter. Let me know afterwards if you need any help or support with Steve Carter. But we are also pursuing expansion to math. Steve Carter currently is just for literacy. But as part of our math work, we're also pursuing the expansion to math tutoring as well for that digital tutoring voucher. But for this summer, it is available for literacy. So I want to remind you all to please take advantage of that. And that concludes this update.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Do we have any comments?
No.
Dr. Chastain, if I could just ask a question relative to the training for the math. Obviously, the science of reason was research-based. That also had, pilot in quite a few, not pilot, but used in quite a few other states. So could you give a little bit more detail on the projected avenue of developing a training per se for those teachers to meet the guidelines of 163?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are developing an RFP, a request for proposals right now, where we will seek one or a group of vendors to partner with us to produce this training. It will be held on an LDOE owned and supported platform so that it is really sustainable over time. It'll be asynchronous and available online, so at the teacher's space. We do plan on including facilitation guides throughout for you all to be able to use if your teacher leaders engage with teachers around it, if your principals engage with teachers around it, but it'll all be held on a PD platform. And so this next year gives us time to identify that vendor through the RFP process and then develop the training.
Thank you.
We do have a comment card. We have Mr. Ron Morris.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I appreciate Dr. Chaison's comments about the Steve Carter program. Just want to take the opportunity to add on to that and follow up. The latest number that I have is that only 1% of the $40 million has actually been accessed. So I was interested, while this group is gathered, if you guys could help us to understand, what those hurdles are or barriers that are in place today that are prohibiting, additional access, what we can do to make those funds available to more kids. So just really interested in the experiences that you guys have had, any way we can help you out. But the latest number I had was only 1% of the $40 million has actually been accessed. Dr. Chason, please help me out if that's not a good number, if there's something more current.
We have about 4,500 kids currently enrolled, and we know we have funding for far more than that.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the council? Thought I saw a few hands. Thank you, Dr. Chancellor. Okay. We have a motion to receive and a second to receive the report. Any opposition? Okay. Motion carries. Thank you. Item 3.2, consideration of an update report regarding teacher recruitment and retention. Motion to receive. We have a motion. We have a motion received by Mr. Bauer. We have a second by Mr. Johnson. Okay. Mr. Bradford.
The next presentation will be by M. Cooper from our Office of Teaching and Learning. So, M.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I am here today to provide an update on our teacher recruitment retention task force and specifically talk about one of those recommendations around teacher evaluation. To give you a little background, the 2021 legislative session created this task force, and they asked the group to do two things. The first one was to provide a landscape analysis of our educator workforce and what else is going on across the country. What are national best practices and research around recruiting and retaining the best teachers? And the second thing was to develop a list of recommendations for both the Board of Regents and the department on how to improve retention and recruitment in the workforce. So the task force had 28 recommendations that have been in the works for about 2 years, leading us to have a nationally recognized recruitment and retention strategy and also a model that other states are using. We're also seeing upward trends in our workforce that directly align to our vision around recruiting and retaining a highly effective, diverse workforce. We are the only state in the country who has seen all of their workforce data increase. We have seen our certified teachers, teachers of color, and our retention rate each increase by 2 percentage points, and our first-year retention rate increased by 5 percentage points. Our teacher pay increased over $1,200 as well. So I'm going to share with you one of those recommendations from the task force today, and that was to study our current educator evaluation system to really understand from teachers and leaders what's working and what things need to improve. Our current system is over 10 years old, and so that really was the driving force for the task force to recommend this improvement. So they asked us to not only hear from educators, but determine what improvements should be made to the system so that it's really geared more towards professional growth and the retention of effective teachers. So we began this work last summer by providing focus groups and a survey to anyone that is evaluated by the system or evaluates someone else in the system. And we heard from over 8,000 educators in our state about their perceptions, about how they feel about the evaluation system, what they thought was valuable about it, and what they would want in an improved system. So today I'm going to share with you the key findings from that study. The first key finding was that the perceptions that leaders and teachers had differed. Leaders, more than teachers, felt like their evaluation gave them actionable feedback, specific recommendations from their evaluator, and that the feedback and the improvements they made led to increased student achievement. The second key finding was that less experienced teachers felt the system helped them professionally grow through having their leader or other instructional leaders on their campus select supports that were aligned to the feedback that they got during those observation and coaching cycles. And as a teacher's years of experience increased, the less valuable they felt that the system was. The third key finding was that teachers and leaders both expressed that the current system was more compliance-based and that it should be a system that leads to professional growth. They also felt like there should be really strong coaching, observation, and feedback cycles as a part of this process, and that they wanted their evaluator to be more present in their classrooms and schools to provide informal feedback during the year, not just the 1 or 2 times they had for that formal observation. One thing we also commonly heard from teachers specifically was that they wanted more professional learning supports aligned to their observation, and in particular a video library so that they could see what does excellent look like in each of those domains. The last key finding was that educators, both teachers and leaders, wanted flexibility in the evaluation model that allowed for some autonomy within the system to allow to track the growth areas of that specific school or system. So they really wanted to see this alignment from what a teacher is professionally learning, aligned to their school's goals and that school improvement plan, which should also be aligned to the system's goals and improvement plan. So the desire was really that through line of making sure that everyone is working towards the things that that school leader or that system leader has indicated as priority work or goals for their system. So I wanted to give you a picture of where we are in this process. So we released an RFP in the fall to select a professional learning partner to assist us in using research and best practices along from the feedback that I just shared with you today to make adjustments to the system. We intend to design a learning year next school year where we will pilot any improvements that are being suggested and collect feedback from school systems on those pilots. We will adjust the components based on what we learn from the pilot along with the feedback that we hear from different educators, and then the next steps will be determined after we learn that from the learning year. We also know that because it was mentioned really heavily in the feedback around professional learning supports, that we want to make sure that any adjustments that are made are also paired with the professional learning supports for educators in those adjustments and to continue that learning throughout the school year. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Cooper. Do you have any comments for us? Any comments from the council?
Yeah, was this specifically around the compass observation tool?
This is around the entire system, including the compass observation tool. So we're really looking at and asked those educators who filled out the survey and focus groups about all pieces. So how they felt about SLTs, how they felt about the data system, how they felt about the support.
So districts that were using the NIT rubric for observation, they were also included in the same data?
Correct. It was every school system. Yes.
Earlier you mentioned the salary increase. Was that a national average comparison? What specifically did you mention?
Oh,
you said 1,200.
Yes. So The workforce data that we produced in January, which is from the previous year, last year, our teacher salary on average increased over $1,200. The thing that I mentioned earlier was that we are the only state in the country where all of our workforce data increased.
I had a question. Can you hear me? So when you talk about the teachers' perceptions being different depending on 1 year versus the teachers who were veteran teachers, were there any open-ended questions to get to a why as to how they perceive the, I guess, the value or the effectiveness of the evaluation?
So in the survey, there were different types of questions, including open-ended questions. The teachers with the least experience indicated that the quality of feedback was really strong, meaning if they were scored certain numbers on the rubric, that evaluator gave them reasons why, and then also what they could do to improve, versus teachers who had been teaching for a very long time feel like that was not of quality.
Thank you.
Sure.
Will this include principals and school leaders as well? So,
Yes.
but the feedback was only gathered by the teacher. I mean, obviously, this is the leader's perception of the teacher evaluation, not what about the administrator and/or.
They did both. So if they were evaluated, they completed a survey, and if they were an evaluator, they completed a survey. So the school leaders are in a both category. So it would be any teacher who's evaluated, librarian, counselor, and then the school leaders, and then principal supervisors or whoever the district has evaluating school leaders also completed it.
I guess most of the feedback looked like it was more of the classroom teacher, and based on those key findings. So were there any key findings that the committee may have had relative to the evaluating board, the principals, the assistant principals, from that standpoint, that maybe you could point to?
The biggest piece was what I mentioned earlier about how valuable they felt their rubric was. So school leaders felt that their observation in particular was very helpful. They felt like their supervisor gave them specific feedback and supports to improve their score. Teachers did not feel as strongly in that area.
Yeah, Pam, I have a couple of questions. Was there any differentiation in the study concerning which rubric they were evaluated with?
They did
In other words,
indicate.
Compass versus NIT versus class versus whatever.
So they indicated if they were the teacher, what rubrics they had. If they were the school leader, they could have had multiple rubrics. And then if they were a principal supervisor, some districts also use multiple rubrics, so they did. We did hear a lot of feedback around school systems who used NIET, and the feedback and fairness of that tool was stronger than how people felt about Compass.
Wow. So some of that data that you come together, if you would separate it out depending upon the rubric, might show some differences.
Yes, I would say so.
All right, and then corollary question to that, you put the RFP out, I'm assuming we're going to get something this month. So is the professional learning partner, NIET, that you're talking about, that is going to partner with us to develop a new instrument or strategy or whatever?
Yes, that was the company that was awarded with the RFP.
So, no assumptions here, but I guess we would assume that we're looking to an evaluation process more in line with the NIET rubric than we are with that 5 indicated Compass rubric.
Yes, and I think one of the main goals of the RFP, and also from the feedback that we've heard, was that a valid and reliable rubric was really important. And I think that also came across in the study. Like you had asked earlier, I think because our rubric is over 10 years old and the creation of that rubric was very different than a tool that's valid and reliable, there was a desire to really see that. But this professional learning partner is more than just the rubric. They're really looking at the entire system. So not just the components of the evaluation, but also the supports that go in place and that professional learning piece. So are we ensuring that teachers are receiving those coaching cycles? Are they getting frequent observations and feedback? Are they getting action steps and supports to help them improve? And so it's really a full package of helping us design what those improvements would look like.
In the formation of the survey that was put out, was anything talked about or put out there concerning VAM? And if so, were you able to see what new teachers thought of that as compared to teachers that have those 10 and 15 years?
So there were questions about each of those components. So we did ask about SLTs, we asked about the rubric, we asked about VAM. I will say there were a couple things that were really prevalent in the results. One was school leaders felt like VAM was the most fair measure out of the three. The second one was that teachers who don't have VAM as a component of their evaluation felt like there should be something similar to that. Same with teachers who do have VAM, other teachers who don't. How do we make sure that that is fair across content areas? So we did hear that as well. And then we had other questions about SLTs and other questions about the rubric, but the majority of the questions were about perceptions, the entire system, and then how they felt like it improved their practice.
Any other questions or comments?
So, simple question. How were the responses? Was it on a Likert scale? Was it on a yes, no? How was that? How are they responding?
All of those. There were open-ended questions. There were some where they could select multiple answers. There were some where they selected one. There were some that there was a scale. So it really depended on the question. I can also, Mr. Jenkins, send the full study too if you want to send it to everybody as well. But in there, Dr. Joseph, you'll see each question along with how each question was responded to by each group. So if you want to see those, I can send that.
My last question is, and I know you're working with the vendor about next steps. Will next steps also include changes to accountability?
In terms of our
the VAM and all of those things, those components that roll up into accountability.
So the whole system will be looked at, yes. Yep.
Any other comments? Thank you, Cooper. We have a motion and second to.
We have one more.
I'm
I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Chasson for the computer science update.
Just one more small update, piggybacking off the recruitment and retention update. Just wanted to mention to you all, we've talked a little bit before about the importance of computer science education. This is something that has really garnered a lot of attention at the legislature. And the Computer Science Education Advisory Commission was formed in the 2022 legislative session, so that group met throughout this year. And they are very keen on ensuring that we have feedback from everywhere across the state. And so just wanted to bring to you all that we have engaged in virtual stakeholder listening sessions across the state and also throughout our Teacher Leaders Summit last week. And so we've also conducted a survey. And so right now we have 56 of the 64 parishes represented by providing feedback on computer science education. This is something that, again, was a hot topic of conversation during legislative session this year. And so know that more is to come around computer science, but we absolutely want every location in the state to have some voice as we work on computer science education. So feedback is ongoing, and just wanted to let you all know, there's still availability to give feedback and to give input by you or any other stakeholders. This includes K-12 educators, higher education, and any of your industry partners that you work with out in your area. And we do have 2 additional Computer Science Education Advisory Commission meetings, and those dates are up on this slide. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments? Okay. Ms. Cooper, before you go, because we're going to be transitioning with chairs in the near future, you please send that study to Ms. Shane, and she'll get it to the next person today. Thank you. All right, we have a motion and second to receive the report. Any opposition? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 3.3, consideration of an update report regarding students with disabilities and best instructional practices. Do we have a motion to receive the report?
Motion.
We have a motion by Mr. Jones. We have a second. We have a second by Dr. Moore. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. I'd also like to just commend Dr. Chasson, who you just saw, and M. Cooper for this year's Teacher Leader Summit. I've been doing the Teacher Leader Summits for almost a decade here at the department, and this was the first time really where I've gone to one of those, and at 3:30 in the afternoon, gone into 3:30 to 4:30 sessions on the days, and they were full, like they were all full. So we had lots of positive feedback. Some of your educators were even part of that doing presentations. So just while they were up here, I just wanted to acknowledge that. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Meredith Jordan, our Executive Director for Diverse Learners, and she'll speak to what Dr. Brumley kind of introed this morning about our work around special education in the playbook.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mr. Bradford. Completely agree. So many folks came up to me after Teacher Leader Summit and said this was the best one, hands down. So super excited. And great to be here with you all again. Excited to come and share with you all, preview with you all, give you an overview of our newly released special education playbook for school system leaders. And we with so much excitement, I'm going to try to contain myself here in front of you all, launched this last week, as Dr. Brumley mentioned this morning, in a special collaborative 3-hour plus session with school system leaders, special education directors, supervisors who joined us last week to launch this playbook, and then literally presented back to back, breaking this playbook down. In front of general educators, special educators, principals, and really got a wonderful reception to a topic and to ideas that will ask us to make changes that may be difficult. But as Dr. Brumley said, this is some of the most challenging work, I believe, that we lead in our school systems. And it does require us to be bold and be brave and make some changes, right? So let's get started. So I'll begin with just a reminder of some of our guideposts that lead our work around special education, and really our playbook and our conversation today are really going to target these first two guideposts, ensuring that for our students with disabilities and frankly, all diverse learners have access to high quality teaching and learning. That means we have to ensure that they have access to inclusive, high quality teaching and learning, and that we are developing all of our educators around their capacity to implement those best practices. And so one of the things that we realized specifically, and when I came into this role 2 years ago, we kind of bucketed out, right, all of the work that is special education. It is massive, and it is challenging, and it is overwhelming. But we have to get very specific about what this is and articulate what are best practices, what are best instructional practices for students with disabilities, and what are they not. And I think for the first time in our state, we are going to have put those in black and white in writing. And then it's not arbitrary, it's not, we're talking about it, yes, we think this is great. What should we do? So let's begin looking at some data points. Again, we collect a lot of special education data. We report a lot of special education data. So these are just some things that I pulled out. Every time I get in front of you all, special education leaders, system leaders, educators, I'm going to start with celebrations. And so
this data, I think, will set the stage. First, we'll have some celebration around this data, and then it will also, we will come to the realization that it is also a call to action for some change and to really reimagine special education in our state. So this data is actually federal indicators that we report to OSIP. And this is specific to Louisiana. It is sometimes difficult to compare across states with some of these indicators because states define proficiency differently. They use different assessments. So I want to talk with you all today about Louisiana students with disabilities. And so I'm also a visual person, and one of the things that I'm proud of on this slide are the check marks on this slide. I know that seems simplistic, but to me, it says a lot. And so you will see here, this is how we report this for OSIP. They ask that we report for grades 4, 8, and high school, mastery for ELA and for math. This year, the first time in many years, in 5 of the 6, we met our federal targets. We showed improvement. Even in that 8th grade, I can't put that check mark there, but we showed improvement. While we didn't meet that target, it was improved. Now, so we met 5 out of these 6 components. They will not allow us to say that we met this target, but this is a point of celebration. This is due to some really intentional, hard work that frankly, after what we call this perfect storm of pandemic, knock on wood, hurricanes, other tragedies that have happened and that have interrupted education, we are managing to show growth. We are managing to show improvement. And we believe those are from some very intentional efforts from you all and from our systems across our state. A couple of those would be around our very specific literacy strategy, our tutoring strategies, our math tutoring work, the ZERN work that is coming out. All of those things have impacted our students with disabilities. Our staffing and scheduling guidance, our focus on providing equitable, accessible intervention time to all students post-pandemic. All of those things around learning acceleration, all of those very specific strategies that you have implemented are leading us to show some growth and some impact for all students and also our students with disabilities. And so this is data that leads us to celebrate. We have things to be proud of in our state. But these same numbers are also a call to action for us, right? I don't think any of us are okay with 6% of our 8th grade math students with disabilities scoring mastery, right? And so this is also a call to action for us. Let's back out a little bit and look at a little bit larger picture. So this slide, and we use this graphic a lot, shows us, right? So our concern here is all of that white space, that achievement gap between our students with disabilities, all students with disabilities showing mastery versus their non-disabled peers and all students. And this is where those challenging and those hard conversations happen. And you say, well, there's students with disabilities, right? Part of this begins with the belief that we can as a state and that these children can. And we can begin to very intentionally close these achievement gaps. And so that number, we're between 10 and 11% of students showing mastery. And the vast majority of our students with disabilities in our state, remember, are children who primarily are struggling to read. And so I truly believe all of our literacy work that we have done, and you'll see, even post-pandemic, we have ticked upward for our students with disabilities. Again, a point of celebration, but also this number right here, 10%, is a call to action. We shouldn't be okay with this number. And we know that there are some very intentional things we're going to have to do, some challenges, some changes that we're going to have to put into place if we want to change these outcomes and improve outcomes for these students. And, you know, internally here in the department, our goal, of course, is to close this achievement gap by 5% over the next few years. But I truly believe that we can do better than that, honestly. And so how are we going to get there? So our office, like I said, Dr. Bromley mentioned it this morning, we're extremely happy to announce at Teacher Leader Summit and release, you all have a copy in front of you, our special education playbook. Our special education directors were not surprised. Many of you, if you have been on School System Leaders Call, we previewed some of this work on our monthly calls. We have previewed some of this work. We have talked about at our state special education advisory panel, among many groups, adopting these 3 best instructional practices. And so finally, 20 plus years of research, best practices, pulling together all of this, has really boiled down to 3 instructional best practices. And we as a state have finally put those into black and white, which is only step 1. This is only the beginning. And so these 3 best practices are aimed at accelerating learning, improving outcomes specifically for our students with disabilities. But quite frankly, many of you will say, well, these are best practices for all students. All students who are struggling, these practices should be in place. What I think this does, and we left Teacher Leader Summit and we talked about these as expectations, and we really messaged this as we wanted everyone leaving our sessions to feel and be committed to special education being different in our state moving forward for children with disabilities. So a focus on core instruction, extra time to learn, and content-strong teachers. And so I'm going to dive into these a little bit with you all. Before I do that, a couple of disclaimers. The I is always individualized, right? We talked about the vast majority, 99% of our students with disabilities, right? We have around 1.6% of students with disabilities in our state, or what we call students with significant cognitive disabilities. Those students will need above and beyond what is in this playbook, right? They need very specialized, very unique supports. But for the vast majority of our kids with disabilities who are struggling to read, who struggle in mathematics, we know the vast majority of our kids are specific learning disabilities, specifically for reading, that these practices will help close achievement gaps for them. What we also know, and what we will have to be very real about, is for the vast majority, for a lot of our students with disabilities, once they get that IEP, once they receive that exceptionality, sometimes, based on traditional practices, previous communication, these students get further from these practices, right? And they get further from a core instruction. They get further from high-quality intervention that all other students are receiving. And so we're just going to have some of those conversations, and I'm excited to get your feedback. And so we do know that there are very specific needs for some students that will go above and beyond this playbook. And so we do have to have that disclaimer. The I in IEP will always be individualized. So let's go over, let's preview.
May I interrupt 1 second? You just mentioned something that brought up, I don't know if I'm on or not. Was there any discussion with the special ed leaders about the accountability in the IEPs that were submitted this past year? Can you share a little bit of that with us? Because it became a big mess prior to testing.
Yes, absolutely. We talked a lot about the implications, and this playbook does give them ideas in black and white for how to implement these practices into an IEP. What I appreciated about the feedback was from our directors, from our educators, yes, this is the right thing. Help us technically. How do I reflect this in my IEPs? And so the playbook will do some of that. We'll give them some practical ideas for how to ensure IEPs are aligned with best practice. But that is also something that I took away as this is great. Reception was great. Folks are excited. Yes, we need to be doing this. We can support the technicalities, and we will.
Because I just know that the IEP decision for testing, then shouldn't it stick with that IEP committee's decision on what that child or independent student does to test, not solely on one department or one group? Am I correct?
Right. IEP teams, and we communicated this last week as well, IEP teams hold all of the power. The IEP is actually the tool to make sure that we can do best practices. I know supporting all of the different levels, from system leader level to school level to educators around this, so that in IEPs we're making best practice decisions, but also realizing, to your point, that IEP team has that decision-making power to determine what's best for a child. I think one of the things we talked a lot about is being very frank about adding this service. The more services, we have to begin to ask questions. What is this child going to miss, right? And really talking about like OT, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. Those are related services. Those are supports students need to access that general education curriculum. But really starting to talk about the more service, the more extra minutes, what is a child going to be missing, and being able to have those conversations. Assessment decisions and eligibility criteria for whether they are eligible for alternate assessment, all of those decisions still remain at that IEP team level.
I just know we had some issues this past spring, and it came out at the last minute and worked out. But I just want to make sure y'all are still communicating that with our special ed director, so
yes,
we're not fighting last minute. If it's changes or things that are legal, we're doing that.
Yes.
For next year. Okay.
Now I'm catching where you're going.
Thank
Yes,
you.
IEP
Okay.
team decisions.
Trying not
for
to get too
assessment.
deep, but
I understand. Yes,
thank you.
you got it. So let's talk about best practice one. So the first best practice is a focus on core instruction. This is one of the things that we often don't say enough, and we don't say enough to general educators, that they are a key piece in the puzzle for success for the vast majority of our students with disabilities. Inclusive core instruction matters the most. And we also know that means we have to support general educators to make sure they have the tools and are equipped. And quite frankly, what we tried to do last week as well was to build them up and tell them, we believe in you as a general educator, as a content expert, that you do have what it takes to support students with disabilities in your classrooms. And so I think part of it, again, is that mindset and that belief in myself as an educator and as a general educator, that I have what it takes to support my students with disabilities. And so the playbook really dives into this idea of inclusive core instruction, less avoiding pullout during core content instruction, because the more services I put in that take a student away from their ELA, their math, their content core instruction, I am missing, right? I am falling further behind in that grade level instruction. And so this visual kind of depicts what that should look like with the vast majority of students with disabilities. And of course, those support services and other arts and electives are not all inclusive, but it really shows for us that general education, that core content, really is the foundation for students with disabilities. And now more than ever, post-pandemic, post other disruptions, we have to focus on this idea of high-quality inclusive core instruction, using accelerated learning, and really general educators needing to hear exactly how valuable they are. And we did sessions last week around students with disabilities, specifically geared toward general educators, and had really good reception there, and also really tried to build them up in their abilities to support these students. And so what does that look like? How do we support success for these students during core instruction? And so the playbook really dives in. The biggest takeaways are really less pulling students with disabilities out of core instruction, ensuring they are taught during core instruction using grade level curriculum. We will talk about the times, and that extra time is really where that is the space where it may be appropriate to go back and pull previous grade level content for a period of time before we hop back to grade level instruction, where we are preloading content, right, and preparing them for those grade level materials moving forward. But during core instruction, really using those grade level high quality materials with these students. And so really the playbook says special education intervention services should be in addition to, not instead of, core instruction. Especially in reading. The vast majority of these children struggle in reading and really need to be in front of that high quality, that content expert in ELA and in reading. The playbook you will also see, which is part of those conversations that we will have to have. And listen, there are school systems, some of you sitting around this table who are in some of our highest performing school systems for students with disabilities. We also convened a panel at one of our collaboratives of our school systems who showed the most growth, because we wanted to hear from them before we released this. What did you do post-pandemic, post all these challenges, to show more growth than the state average around students with disabilities? And so we know there are good things happening for these students in our state. But what we also know is, we've got to talk about push-in services, co-teaching, because the research says the more individuals sometimes not always, that you put in front of a student, it's also distracting. How am I listening to my content teacher, that content expert, if my attention is also being garnered by another individual in that room trying to support me? And so we just have to step back, look at our practices, look at those cautions, and see how are they working. Where are they working? Where are they not working? How can we better use our staff, which are some conversations that we'll talk about when we get to that best practice as well. So let's talk about the second best practice is extra time to learn. Something that the vast majority of our students with disabilities, honestly, we have more diverse learners in our state now, post some of our challenges, than we ever have. And so that's one of the things I think that we have done a great job is more school systems have this time now built into the day, whereas it used to be perhaps I was trying to tutor in the morning, we were trying to provide some intervention after school tutoring, and it wasn't accessible. Sometimes these are the students that need to get on that bus and get home because I needed that transportation. Any quick questions?
Just have a quick question. You may have said this or I may have missed it. Is there a video where a teacher can actually go and see these practices, like a video library that's created?
Not yet, but support is coming. Like I said, first step is getting the playbook out there, releasing the expectation, and we will talk about some of those next steps, but I think that's a great idea. All right, so extra time for intervention. And so we've been saying hold core sacred, but we also can't expect students with disabilities to close our achievement gaps and grow, knowing that they are further behind sometimes than their non-disabled peers, and do that in the same amount of time that we expect other students to do. And so this is where this best practice around extra time to learn came, and really building in intervention into our school day. And this really builds on the staffing and scheduling guidance that we have. And many of our school systems, we have gone through that with special education directors. Every time we talk about some of these challenges and what these best practices are, what steps we need to take, it comes back to staffing and scheduling. And we know that scheduling is a daunting task, and it is difficult. And to make sure that schedules serve students, it is challenging and difficult. And so we really lean into some of that staffing and scheduling guidance here in the playbook, and we talk about what is effective intervention. And let's be real frank. So if I have a student who has a reading goal in an IEP, sometimes we will see that student will receive special education minutes for reading 3 times a week, 30 minutes. Best practice says that's not enough, that it should be 5 days a week. And I think across our state, much of that is happening. Like I said, we have done a lot to add additional time into our day to address learning loss for some of our challenges. And so I think that this is headed in the right direction. I think now we can switch focus and begin to support around what is happening during those intervention time periods. And when I say intervention, we have done a lot unintentionally to muddy some waters here, right? So acceleration, intervention, RTI, all of those different labels, resource rooms, all those labels that we call those things usually are one and the same, right? So those are our intervention times. What is happening in those intervention times, I think now is something we can really as a state switch our focus to. And we know that effective intervention should be connected to the core content. That is where they can pre-teach, reteach, try different ways, teach that content in a different way to try to bring that student up to where they need to be. Fill in missing foundational skills. Those are where, during that additional time, during that intervention time, that those things can happen. We also know, and we pulled in, we also try to make it easy for you all to make connections, and we really pulled in some of the ideas from our professional learning roadmap around what is best practice collaboration, and really bringing special educators and general educators together and to the same table. And I'll say this to you all, we know that needs to be happening also at a system level, right? So we just talked about general education is really a key piece of the puzzle to helping to support students with disabilities. That means we have to get our CAOs, our special education directors, all of those people at a system level, and then on a school level leadership team, that special education is also there at the table to really talk about those specific intentional interventions. What is happening? What are we seeing? What do teachers need more support with? And so the playbook also will remind us that this level of intervention, we are much, much better. So this kind of shows you where we have gone with elementary schedules, for example. But the playbook also reminds us for students with disabilities as well, and honestly, any high school student who is struggling, that intervention also has to be available at those middle and high school levels. We also know that best practice there, and the struggle with high school, again, goes back to scheduling. High school is probably some of the hardest schedules to manage. You've got Carnegie credits that have to be earned and very, very prescriptive. But any time that we can, connecting that intervention period to an elective. And we will work on making sure course codes are available to do that. There are some there already for you to use. So some people, I think we've got some old terminology in there. Remediation, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So there are different courses that we can use, course codes we can use to do these things in high school, but as much as we can and as many credits as we can, awarding credit around that high school intervention. So that students, they get the support that they need to close achievement gaps, but they are also feeling as though they are accomplishing, right? And meeting their high school goals. So what does high quality extra time, what does high quality intervention look like? So we kind of talked about this on the previous slide too. It should be connected to that core instruction taking place. It should involve those hands-on activities, individualized supports, rather than intervention that's disconnected from the core. And so I think this is a conversation, and, you know, as we are out in schools and out in our classrooms, visiting those resource rooms, visiting study skills, what are happening in terms of intervention in some of those classes. And I believe they're used in different ways across our state. Some may be effective interventions, and then in some cases, study skills may be a place where students are getting help with homework. I may have, as a special educator, a student in there who needs reading support, who needs math support, who is in this grade level, 5th grade level, 3rd grade level. How effective, right, are our groupings? What do those groups of students, intentional groups of students we know, is a best practice when we talk about intervention. And special education loves small group and small group intervention and small group instruction. But what we actually know is the needs of those students in intervention groups and small instruction groups matters more than the size of the group. So if I have a group of 3 students, but they all need something different, versus a group of 5 students who all need the same phonics need, or they all have a specific number sense need, then I can better support through direct instruction and intervention and really close achievement gaps versus, and we have done that to special educators and asked them to do a multitude of things. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Interventions should emphasize forward movement. Remember I said intervention is that place where I can grab those foundational skills, but I should always try to get back to grade level instruction. What we now know is, and we have done this for years in special education, we have looked at a student's performance on a cognitive assessment, and sometimes we have said if that student is in 4th grade but they're on a 2nd grade level, I'm going back. I'm going down here to 2nd grade. But what we know is if we stay there, they will never catch up, right? And so really emphasizing, even with intervention, that intervention is really directed towards helping them succeed on grade level material, using those foundational supports and pulling in what they need to help them do that. And we've got, you know, of course in the playbook you'll see at the end, it's set up very, very clearly by best practice, but it talks about some of the resources and research at the end, and we looked a lot at What Works Clearinghouse and some of those big research powerhouses around small group instruction. What is the perfect size of a group? And so we have some of that, and the playbook kind of dives into that for us to look at. All right. Third but not least, ensuring students with disabilities are supported and provided intervention and core content by content-strong educators. And so by no fault of our own, I said this a minute ago, we have treated special educators like they are experts in everything, right? I mean, they have special in their title, right? I mean, even as a general educator, I truly believe that our general educators believe they are doing what's right. When they have that student with an IEP and they say, you need to go to the special educator. That person knows exactly how to support you. And this also says that general educators, special educators, interventionists, literacy coaches, lots of educators and individuals and support personnel can be content strong, right? But if I'm a student who has a challenge in reading and I am being supported for that reading challenge by someone who is not a content expert around the science of reading, has not been trained on how to teach a student to read, they are probably not the content strong person who should be supporting that challenge. And so these are just practices, self-awareness that I think this guidebook is going to ask us to go self-assess our practices. What is happening in our schools? How are our staff being used? Are we playing to staff strengths? Are we designing content-strong educators? Maybe we have, and now many of our post-secondary institutions are moving toward dual certification, right? So if we, and I'm not thinking about certification when I say content strong, but sometimes that's where we go, and say grab a content and then add on for example, a mild moderate certification. But the playbook will also, I say that to say this, the playbook will also caution us around a couple of things with Content Strong. We have a lot of paraeducators in our state. Our playbook will ask us to self-assess those individuals. Are they Content Strong experts? Some of them, we have some paraeducators, hence some of our work from our para-to-teacher model, who should be teachers, who are content experts, who do have the content knowledge and training. But the playbook will by and large caution us from using paraeducators for academic support. It will tell us how, and there are multiple ways and multiple very important roles that our paraeducators play. But usually an academic support, a reading support, or a math support is typically just not their strength. For some there is. But the playbook will ask us to really look at that. How are we using paraeducators? Are we using paraeducators to provide a lot of academic intervention? And so it says very specifically that Content Strong educators could be an educator, an interventionist. Content Strong can be a special educator, a specialist, a general educator who has training in that content, who has the aptitude, who has the passion. And many of our school systems are already rethinking this. A year ago when we launched this, we told SPED directors, don't wait for me. Here are our practices we are going to adopt. Don't wait. And some of you and some of them didn't. And we are seeing some school districts already redesigning and rethinking special educators. How do I build them as Content Strong? How do I utilize my special educators as true interventionists? And so really commend, and so I know there's really great work, and I know a lot of this, some of this has been started in some of our school systems, and we can grow and learn from one another. We can, we talked a lot last week to general educators. We emphasized the importance of that growth mindset and a belief that these students can achieve. We've talked a little bit today about putting support structures in place, leveraging teacher collaboration structures. And when we also design and use our special educators as interventionists, as a Content Strong person, it's going to, I think they're going to be excited about it, and it's going to make them excited, and it's going to ease their minds a little bit, because if I'm a special educator right now, I may need to go to 3 or 4 teacher collaborations based on the number of grade levels I'm supporting and the number of contents I'm supporting. And that's just not reasonable, right? We're asking them to do so many things. And I think out of a good place, right? They have special in their name. They're superheroes. But I think it will really allow us to focus them in as interventionists and truly use them in that way to help support our students. And so, so the elephant in the room is, right, what do we do with special educators? What do we do, if we're looking at push-in and we're looking at co-teaching, what do I do with my special educators? And we've been talking a little bit about this, really designing them as Content Strong and supporting them and using them as interventionists to support these students, very specific to a content to help close their achievement gaps. We talk a lot in the playbook about utilizing special educator strengths instead of sometimes asking them to do the impossible to support all these grade levels and content. You have a lot of different needs in your school systems. We hear a lot of needs around behavior supports, case management, and so really playing to their strengths and figuring out in our schools who's going to play what roles and who's going to be effective in those roles and who's going to be those content interventionists either going in or supporting students during those extra time periods. And so then to kind of end so I can get some comments and feedback. Next steps. So this is just the beginning. We are certainly throughout the next year going to offer ongoing support, probably a regional in-person. I really like in-person trainings and discussions and collaboration. We got to hear from a lot of educators and leaders last week. And so doing some regional tours around the playbook. We'll also have some asynchronous modules, some virtual options for convenience, for support. We also plan to support this rollout because, again, there are some entrenched practices, some traditional things that we have done around students with disabilities, and I feel like we have to support leaders and educators to know it's legal, we can do this, not only we should, and also some very specific funding guidance on how to leverage funding to implement these best practices and really clarify how they can use their IDEA funds in particular, but also other funds to support these students, and leveraging a very unique opportunity in IDEA funds that actually can be used to support early intervention services, where you are seeing for specific grades and groups of students specific challenges. There are some specific ways we can leverage dollars to support that. And again, I've talked about this, we want to support this from every level in order to really change special education and implement these practices and have Louisiana special education look and be different and improve outcomes for our students. We're going to support every single level, from school system level leaders to our principals. We hear that a lot, is principals need support around practices for students with disabilities. Often our principals are the ones who are ODRing these IEP meetings where decisions are being made, right? So we want to support them, and of course all of our educators, from general education and our special educators. That's one of the things that I've really realized is our general educators play such a huge role in these students' educational journey. We have to do more to support them. Number one, just making them believe in themselves, and two, give them the supports and development that they do need, that they feel like to be successful. And so I want to end saying this. I believe in us as a state. I believe in you all as leaders. I believe in our schools. And I know that we will make change and that we will improve outcomes for these students with disabilities. It is exactly what I was hired to do and my mission. So we will do that. I believe, and I tell people constantly, we have not shared this. This is about us. This is about our children. This is about our state. But I believe that we are a state to watch nationally, period. But also specifically for what we're going to do for our diverse learners and for our kids with disabilities as a result of some of these changes, and having some of these very frank, very hard conversations around some of our children who need the most support and who often garner the most challenging conversations. It literally is the work of special education. We have shared this playbook with a couple because I also recognize the levers that we need. And we have shared this with some national organizations and just asked them, take a look, tell me what you think. And so we have endorsements from the Fordham Institute, from CASE, the National Organization of Administrators for Special Education. And so I do believe that we are a state to watch, and I want to read you one quote from a research institute who said that educators should run, not walk, to make these practices commonplace in our schools. And that's exactly what we charged everyone leaving Teacher Leader to do. And as always, we're here to support. This is not, we're dropping it. This is challenging. You're on your own. It will garner challenging conversations. It will garner technical conversations. I was really appreciative last week at Teacher Leader. The excitement was through the roof. And if all we have to figure out is how we document SPED minutes versus Gen Ed minutes, we'll figure out the technical pieces for what is right for students. I appreciate your time and welcome feedback, comments.
Mayor, thank you for the report, and I appreciate all the work. I do have one question, because I want to know, as a superintendent, my people came back and we've already sat down and looked at this playbook, but I've also, on the other side, at a Lucia conference today, have our special ed attorneys saying to hold off on some things because they don't feel like everything in this playbook is completely legal. And you're saying it's legal, and so as a superintendent, I mean, obviously you did your homework, but as a superintendent, what are the areas surrounding, why is there some question about some legalities? As a superintendent, this is not my cup of tea, I'm not going to admit to knowing all of this, but what are some things that the superintendent should be looking for? Why are there some questions? Because my special ed legal counsel is who I want to lean to when it comes down to where are those areas that we should see some concern or need to get more direction from.
Yeah, and we've shared it with him. Gonna work with him, gonna get some feedback. We have also, I'll also share this, I don't know if this makes you feel better or not. We also have endorsement from a former commissioner from the Office of Special Education Rehabilitative Services, so OSIP, essentially. So I think that we should feel very comfortable that what is best for children is also legal. And I think the legal briefing will also help with that. So we are gathering all of the OSIP and some of those legal letters and documents. You know, OSIP loves to write letters to so-and-so, and they'll give their opinion of the law. And so we're gathering all of those to show here's what these guidance letters say around this. There is a lot of, like I said, traditional practice and confusion around, can a general educator provide services, special education services to a student with a disability? Frankly, to me, that question is, it's what's right for students. If I'm the person who is the reading expert, I should provide the intervention for those students. And so we'll have some of that support coming for you. But really interested in, like, what are the questions, what are the legal worries here?
So Meredith, I think what I'm hearing you say is that they have some concerns within the playbook about the legalities of it. They should just reach out to you.
Yes.
You'll set up.
Yes.
We'll work through it.
And I was supposed to be at Lucia, but was in North Carolina, or I would have been with them.
Just piggybacking on that for a minute, because you talked about general ed versus special ed minutes. You know, we're talking about these legalities. We're all in the middle of these conversations with our attorneys, with our special education supervisors, with the department people. This has to get resolved pretty quickly.
Yes.
You know, when we talk about, part of the issue is what counts as a special ed minute? Is it who provides it? Is what it's always been defined as. So if I had a special ed kid, or a kid needed special services, if it was provided by a non-certified special ed teacher, it didn't count.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was a little ridiculous. I believe that if your content's strong, you can provide some, but the issue really is who knows best the instructional strategies to use, not necessarily the content. But if I have a kid with different exceptionalities who is going to learn a little differently or needs specific strategies that maybe the majority of your kids don't, it's a really slippery slope thing. So we have trained interventionists who can provide some of these interventions, but they're not SPED certified.
Right.
So when are we going to resolve these issues? Because we're getting ready, we're planning now for the upcoming year. We've already done scheduling, we've already done staffing. We're in the middle of all of this. So in order to get some clarity to what can happen, it's got to happen really soon to get some clarity. So when do you anticipate?
Yeah, and it's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to go back and unpack this overnight and begin to think, what am I going to do to change all of this? It may take multiple steps over 1 or 2 years, you know, to really feel like we've got them implemented. I will say IDEA says nothing about certification. It talks about content knowledge and skill to be able to support a student with a disability. Some of the letters that we're going to share, they're already out there, really talk about a student with a disability cannot not, where's my letters, people? Cannot not participate in high-quality intervention just because there's non-disabled students in that class, just because it's provided by a general educator. Special education students have to be afforded all of those opportunities. And sometimes those are the interventions with that high-quality, content-strong person who is going to best be able to close their achievement gaps.
So are you looking at changing guidance to the bulletin right now?
We may need to. We haven't identified any bulletin language that, I will say, we have identified that across our state, we are providing hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of special education minutes that we have to wrap our mind around. What are those special education minutes? What is happening in those places, spaces, periods where special education minutes are being provided? Now, I'm not talking speech, OT, PT, those related service minutes. That's very clear what's happening in there, who's providing them. There are very specific licensure requirements and guidance around who has to provide all of those things for sure. But really going back and self-assessing and saying, what are all of these special education minutes that we are documenting and what is happening? And I think this is part of the process of diving into what all is really happening, because it's different across the state, and what shifts, whether it's documenting in the IEP, determining what is a general ed minute, what is a special ed minute, because we've got some really great things happening out there, and there's so many innovative things that it's hard to plug into a this or that. So let me give you an example. Brilliant idea, and one of the things that you will hear me say, we give disclaimers about students with significant disabilities, but you all know my stance, if you know me, is even a student with a significant disability, as much as possible, to the maximum extent possible and appropriate, should also be afforded these practices. And we have school systems that are doing some really innovative things around perhaps a student who has a behavior need or behavior challenges or environmental, sensory issues. I can't, for whatever reason, operate in that classroom for 50, 60, 90 minutes if I'm on a block. But I can, in a different location in my school, potentially with a special educator or support personnel, tap into all of this virtual opportunities we have now and tap into a content-strong teacher down the hall and be included in that high-quality general education instruction, right? And then we get into the conversation, is that general education? Is that special education? And so there's so many innovative things. There are so many different ways. You never say never in special education, but I think these are really great beginning conversations. This is exactly what the playbook is meant to ignite initially, are conversations around what is happening, and then we can figure out like what are the documentation nuances as we roll out the implementation and move forward. But definitely understand, appreciate, and hear the technicalities.
And so, Meredith, just to come back full circle to the next steps, you want up there, the ongoing support and adoption of implementation of the best practices. So through individual conversations with concerns that they may have, your monthly calls that you have, et cetera, you will continue the dialogue and keep it open to address concerns as they
Yes, this is just the beginning.
No, I just wanted to add clarification on what Ms. Dorr spoke about would be critical, and I just wanted to echo that, but also say the other direction will need clarification as well. And what I mean by the other direction, if a regular education student requires intervention, there are limitations on who can provide that as well, right? So if you've got a special education teacher providing enrichment services to special education students, absent an inclusive setting, they can't provide that to a regular education student. So those limitations, they handcuff administrators on how we provide interventions. And so just locking it as you don't need remediation or enrichment, you just need intervention. If we paint it with a really broad brush, my understanding in its very limited form is that that can get you in trouble. So we would need detailed explanations on both the push in and pull out, who could provide it and when, to implement this plan as I understand it. So that would be my request.
Will do.
So I think when you speak of your next step and you talk about funding guidance, I think that's going to be extremely important because we also have to maintain effort with special education funding. And we would also have to consider probably more innovatively than ever before the braiding of funding so that special education dollars could be partially used for gen ed salaries, so then some of these things legally could perhaps happen.
Yes, the funding guidance will be a big piece, and there's been a lot of change around maintenance of effort, supplement, not supplant, and some of those rules have really changed. My understanding is if you're meeting your overall system maintenance of effort, we don't have to apply supplement, supplant to every single budget item, every single thing we want to do. But that guidance will come and will also have the backing of federal finance experts to make us feel much better about it.
You know, I just wanted to reiterate what Jared was talking about. You know, we talk about inclusion so much to include our special education students within the regular education setting. But the minute we want to reverse that, as Jared gave the example, if we're having an intervention with 2 or 3 special education students, if we include a regular ed kid in it, doesn't count for the special ed kids, doesn't count for their minutes. So it destroys, I guess, the staffing and the setup that we have done because we want to include one non-special ed within the group. That really, and I'm not going to get into gifted and talented right now, but that's one of the reasons with the gifted and talented issues too. You know, if we have a group of talented kids and we want to take one kid who shows a great deal of promise and include them in that small talented session, it doesn't count for the talented kids as part of their service. So I really think in concept, I would ask that y'all look into how that really can work.
Ways we
because
can
it
make
is
that
best for kids. So if we're including one way, we should be able to include the opposite way as well, if it benefits these children. So please take a look at that when you're looking at the overall concept, and that would help tremendously in how we provide the best services for the majority of our kids.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's exactly what we're here for, is to say, how can we do this? There are ways to make sure that our funding is working for our best practices and what we know is good for children. We'll help with that.
Any other comments?
Is there something in here that you can put in that's just not where I was laying with accountability, right? I mean, all of this is nice and all, and if it works out right, because at the end of the day, it's what's good for kids, but also, you know, accountability plays a part in all of this. And there are, you know, certain requirements and certain things that we have to do, and if it's not done, then, you know, we see it reflected in accountability. So I look through here and I don't see anything where it reflects any of that and how it can connect to where it makes sense for everyone. You know, because if it's not going to help me, and of course a lot of us feel like if it doesn't help improve outcomes regarding test scores, then what's the use? What's the purpose?
Yeah, I agree. We have 3 big levers, right? Funding, policy, accountability. And we can definitely look at ways that we can do that, ways we can, and those are in the future too, ways that we can incentivize these practices, and then how, so through funding, what could we offer school systems?
I don't mean incentivize,
Yeah.
no. I'm not saying change accountability.
Right.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying show right now how this connects to the existing accountability.
Got it. So one of the ways we can do that and plan to do that as well is connect this for special education directors and system leaders to all of the special education data and accountability that already exists for us, and how this impacts all of those different levels of federal reporting data, and how this connects to your own LEA determinations that says, here's how you're doing in special education for your students in your school system. And so there are definitely ways that we can make that tie. I appreciate that.
I think you already have that data, just incorporated in there.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second to receive the report. Any opposition? Okay, hearing none, motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Short. We'll move to item 4.1, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 111 regarding weights for calculations grade 8 assessment index in the 23-24 SPS during the social studies assessment transition.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Our Assistant Superintendent, Thomas Langer.
Okay, motion to receive of the report. All right, we have a motion by Mr. Villiers, second by Mr. Martin to receive the report. Mr. Langer.
Good almost afternoon. Glad to be with y'all. So social studies standards revisions happened. We then began the work of rewriting our social studies assessment to align to those more coherent social studies standards. Through that process, that requires us to create a new set of assessments for 3 through 8, as well as high school civics. We want to make sure those assessments align to our vision and structural priorities. We want to make sure that it's asking questions about content and also requires them to apply their social studies knowledge and skills and use sources that are embedded in the test. We want to make sure that it's providing good, high-quality information to parents and educators, and we want to always ensure that we're involving Louisiana educators in the development of our assessments. Actually, I'm not sure if they're happening today, but for sure this week we've had educators sitting in conference rooms reviewing items that we hope to use in the state assessments in order to make sure that they are measuring the right things. So social studies field testing is something that we need to do. Normally our field test items are embedded inside of the assessment. There's a handful of field test slots. Students are taking those tests, and those items on there don't go into their final score, but they are giving us the data that we need to determine which assessment items from that field test can be used on the next test. When you completely change your set of standards, you then have to field test a whole lot of items. So we have to do a special field testing whole assessment. So that is what we will be doing for next school year. And this just kind of shows that timeline. This year's the final administration of the traditional social studies assessment that we've used for years. Next year will be our field test of the assessment, and then it will become operational in 24-25. Historically, the last time that this happened, basically the approach was to use the higher of the previous 2 social studies assessments that they had. So the 2018 results were based off of the higher of the 2 of the 16-17 or the 15-16 results. So they were quite old from that perspective, and there was an option. Neither of those 2 things are things that the U.S. Department of Education is willing to accept at this time. After those conversations, we looked at several options, and the key point that we looked at was ensuring that we have stability. So we don't have 1 year of scores declining or 1 year of scores going up, because what goes up, if it's not real, will come down the following year when the results come back in. So what we came up with was equally weighting ELA, math, and science, because we will not have social studies scores. And the result of equally weighting them without a social studies assessment in there is essentially 97% of schools stay the same, 3% of schools increase a letter grade, and that's 35 schools, and 2 schools decrease a letter grade. So it gives us really good stability in terms of letter grade distribution, so you don't have anything going up that when the social studies scores come back in, everything comes back down, and then you have to explain why that happened, when the reality is that it's no bad action on your part. You might actually have had better results than in the past, but because they were artificially raised because something wasn't included, your scores are going down. So the proposal would be to evenly weight ELA, math, and science for the 1 year of social studies field testing would be the proposal that we would send to Bessie. Happy to entertain any questions.
Do you have any questions from the council?
I'm just going to comment because, Thomas, I just want to publicly agree with you for the first time in 3 years. I talked to our accountability people and outlined the numbers, which you know I would, and so I'm going to publicly support this motion by Thomas.
There you go, Tammy.
Let's go.
I make a motion to endorse this item.
Second?
I'll second it, because of time. We have a motion in a second to endorse.
We have it in writing now.
Any other comments before we move forward?
Thomas, just for clarification, explain one more time the difference between the 17-18 and what the proposal is for now.
So essentially, in the transition year, schools were allowed to use, social studies was included, but it was stale data from before that year. So it was the year before or the assessment before that in case you didn't like the results from immediately previous. So USAID doesn't like any of those components. They don't like when you're given a choice of this or that, and they don't like when you're using scores that are old. So that's the primary issue there.
And I know we're talking about third through eighth grade, but while I have you, just real quick. The civics testing, just because we're planning for the future, is there going to be a caveat is there going to be a specific grade level attached to that?
There will be no specific grade level that civics must be taken at.
Okay, thank you.
At least not at this time. There's nothing in policy.
Any other comment? We have a substitute motion by Mr. Bartlett, second by Mr. Alexander, to endorse this item, item 4.1. Do we have any opposition? Hearing no opposition, motion carries. Okay. Item 4.2, consideration of revision. Consider revision of Budget 741, Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators regarding the appeals process for all students anticipated to graduation assessment.
I want to convince my U.S. history teachers.
Do we have a motion to receive the motion and second? Mr.
No, that would be, so if you refer to page 24 of your packet, it gives it an overview of how this item was added to the agenda. If you recall, you all made a motion at your last meeting to follow up with the ELL or EL graduation policy. The board met in April and gave specific direction in relation to that for Ms. Dr. Davis to do some work with the department and with me, and asked to bring that item to SAC in its new form, which is what we have here as the item title. And so in that vein, Dr. Belinda Davis, who is an associate professor of political science at LSU, she's our at-large member. She's also the former assistant director of the public policy research lab at LSU. And then we have Dr. Holly Bophy, who is an elected member, and she is a principal at what school?
the WD and Mary Baker Smith Career Center in Lafayette, Louisiana.
And so they're going to give you an overview of this policy presentation.
Thank you so much for having us today. We're excited about sharing this proposed change. We are here to talk about a policy change that would create a graduation appeals policy for students in the state of Louisiana. And as we developed this policy, every decision that we made depended on the answer to these questions. Is this best for children? Will this help our high school students be better prepared for life after high school? Whether that was participation in the workforce, whether or not it was participation in higher education, or some combination of those two things. Our presentation, as we're going to follow this outline, give you a little bit of background about how we got here. We're going to look at state research that we did around the country to see where Louisiana fits in the national landscape. We're going to spend most of our time on the nuts and bolts of our proposal and implementation question and answers with you. We really value your opinion surrounding implementation of this policy. We spent a lot of time trying to think about the ways that could best make this work at school levels, and then we'll talk about possible recommendations. So in March of 2023, at the Superintendents Advisory Council, you heard a very brief description of the potential for providing an appeals process for EL students. There was not a lot of detail in that meeting, and you rightfully made a motion asking the department to prepare a more detailed policy for you to see and evaluate surrounding that. But as we watched the Superintendent's Council meeting that day, we also heard many of you say that you thought this was something that could benefit all students in the state of Louisiana, and Bessie listened to you. And in our April Bessie meeting, we had a motion asking the department to draft policy that would create a graduation appeals process for all students in the state of Louisiana, and to do so in a manner that depended heavily on the appeals process in the state of New Jersey and the state of Texas. And we picked those two states because New Jersey has a very rigorous implementation process that really pushes heavy on the portfolio process, allowing students to demonstrate proficiency in a manner other than a high-stakes test. And we picked Texas because of their weight on student outcomes. And so what we think we have done with this policy is to take the best of both of those states' processes and design one that works in Louisiana. So who would this affect? So these numbers come from a Bessie meeting in which the department was giving us data around COVID waivers. And so in 2019, we know that 4% of our seniors failed to pass all of their EOC exams, making them eligible for graduation. It was 6% in 2021, and in 2022, it was 7%. That 7% is probably a little high because when the department was reporting that data to Bessie, all of the second chance into course exams over the course of the summer had not been included in that number. But this is roughly, if it stayed at 77%, that would be roughly 3,000 students in the state of Louisiana that would have the potential to graduate through this appeals process after some really rigorous work on the part of that student and their district. So to think about where Louisiana is nationally, we're one of 8 states that still requires end-of-course exams, meeting a certain score or cut point to graduate, but we are the only state that does not have an appeals process surrounding this requirement, right? We are really an outlier in that regard, and given what has happened post-COVID, we're going to be more of an outlier. Because consistent with SAC's suggestion, what we did was we went back to the drawing table after having worked on EL appeals processes to think about this for all students. And what we know other states are doing in response to what they saw from COVID waivers is they are starting to shift their attention from these high stakes tests to more formative assessments that think about college persistence and are thinking specifically about career readiness. So just thinking about other states in 2023, this just gives you an idea of what other states are thinking about, right? So Pennsylvania is thinking about 5 diploma pathways, one of which is a career tech that is absent any high stakes testing, right, and can be met with only a portfolio. And then in Texas, they recently made their portfolio process permanent, but they're also considering eliminating their high stakes testing altogether. So just gives you an idea of if even some of these states move in these directions, Louisiana will be even further an outlier when it comes to what other states are doing surrounding testing. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the Texas story because I think it's really impressive in thinking about why this appeals process is so important. The Texas started their appeals process in 2014. It was done through statute. The legislature every couple of years had to renew it based on data that was being collected by the State Department of Education as well as higher ed. In 2021, the state of Texas made this appeals process permanent with a unanimous vote of the Texas House and Senate. And so I don't have to tell you how rare it is to get Democrats and Republicans these days to agree on anything, but I was like, what? And so I was like, I want to go and watch what has been happening in these committees. And what you would see as this policy was being debated over time was the human story of parents with a child with dyslexia that had to come to that committee and say, my child would not have graduated high school without this appeals process. The EL student to come and say, I would not have graduated without this appeals process. Now I'm in community college. The parent of the child with test anxiety, right? There was even a legislator in one of the committee hearings who said that his son took one of their STAR tests 4 or 5 times before finally meeting the bar by 1 point. And the legislator said, we would have availed ourselves of this process if our son had not finally gotten that 1 point that he needed to pass. And so there were these very compelling arguments. And what you saw is Texas over time tracked the data on the percentage of students that were using the appeals process. It wavered between 2 and 5% of all of their graduates. And 30 to 50% of the students who started this appeals project were denied graduation because they failed to meet the requirements. And so what they have is a rigorous process that is working for students. And what's even more impressive is how it's working, right? And so this graph shows you the employment status of individuals in Texas that have graduated using this appeals process. And so if you look at that first bar, that seems low because these are graduates through the traditional pathway, and a lot of them are in school full-time, right? So they may not be employed. But if you look at the individual graduation committee graduates, so that's their appeals process group, nearly 70% of them are engaged in employment, right? Compared to 40-something% of students who are dropping out, right, who are leaving high school without that diploma. And that there, to me, is evidence that there is something going on in this appeals process that is decreasing youth disconnectedness between higher education and employment, right? And that is something that Louisiana specifically needs, right? We have some of the highest youth disconnected rates in the country. Another thing to see is that the employment data for Texas that you see there at 70% is likely conservative because many of these graduates are students who lack the proper documentation to have a social security number to be counted in workforce labor data, right? So that 70% probably is actually greater when it comes to engagement in the workforce. I'll also say that about 14% of the Texas appeals graduates go on to post-secondary education, and their persistence in post-secondary education matches national data, right? So there's really something happening here. Something good, right? That's the same figure. I'm not sure why that's in there twice. I apologize. That one is prettier, though, than I made the yellow one. There's better. So as we think about this, when we thought about everything that we learned from all of those states, we did think that Louisiana could design a process that would work better for us because we know our specific needs. We know our high rates of youth disconnectedness. We know the gap between the number of students we have on a university diploma pathway compared to those that are on TOPS Tech, and we thought that we could do something that would best serve students in our state. And so we created what we call the expanded criteria for every learner in Louisiana in this appeals process. So here's how it works. To appeal the process, students can appeal if they have not met the assessment requirement on both exams of any content pair, right? So they are missing an end-of-course exam pass in any of the 3 pairs that we require. Students cannot appeal this until their senior year. That does not mean that they and their schools are not already working towards making sure that they can meet the requirements of this appeal process. But what we expect to see as schools lean into this student with the remediation that is going to be required to meet the appeal process, we think that a lot of these students are actually going to end up passing their end-of-course exam and not needing the appeals process, right? And so we don't want to pigeonhole them into the appeals process until we know for sure that they are absolutely going to need it. But there's going to be a lot of work to be done to make sure that they meet the requirements. So here's what why we think Louisiana's design is better, because we have an explicit focus on employability as well as meeting content proficiency. So the first thing you have to do is that student has to meet all the Carnegie units for TOPS University or TOPS Tech. So this means if you have a student who is in Algebra 1 and they have a D in Algebra 1 and their end of course exam brings them to an F in that class, they are not eligible for this process, right? Students have to meet the Carnegie credit in order to be eligible, right? So these students need to be working hard in their classes, demonstrating to their teacher through their grades that they have mastered the content. The second is that they demonstrate content proficiency as they enter the appeal process through either meeting that standard assessment, so they might have 1 pair where they passed English 1, right? So they're good there. But on the pair that they did not pass, they have to provide portfolio work demonstrating content mastery for both subjects in the pair. Right? We are asking them to demonstrate content mastery in a way even a diploma on a traditional pathway does not, right? We're saying you need to show us that you can meet the requirements for both Algebra 1 and geometry, all right? And then also, we are asking them to demonstrate employability through one of 3 ways. Earning a silver or higher on an ACT work keys, earning TOPS Tech, or earning a Jumpstart approved industry-based credential. And that's regardless of whether or not the student is on a university pathway, a university diploma pathway or not. We want that industry-based credential so that they can demonstrate, right, to us that they are going to be ready for post-high school life, right, to help them move either into the workforce or into community college or a 4-year university. Right? So we think that Excel is the answer for Louisiana because we are asking for increased evidence of content proficiency, right? And this allows flexibility among the school leaders that know the student best, right? And know what they are capable of and is going to be able to demonstrate competency to the school, the SBLC team that will be in charge of this process for the student. We think it makes Louisiana competitive because we are thinking about this in terms of industry-based credentials, right? It's going to increase the number of students that we have leaving high school prepared for the workforce. And then also we think that it aligns with national priorities, right? What is happening at the national level surrounding high stakes testing. All right, and so our hope today is that we can get an endorsement from SAC to urge Bessie to pass this in our June meeting. We would love for you to come and speak in support of this policy at the June meeting, and that we would like for you to urge DOE to give you implement guidance around this. And so we have in your packet, you have an implementation FAQ, right, that hopefully will address a lot of the questions surrounding implementation, but we would love to kind of hear from you. What are your concerns about this implementation process? And just to give us your feedback on it. And before you do that, though, I'm going to do my kind of phone a friend, right? Because we had two young women who this policy would not be here without them. It is Truba Chavez, who is an educational diagnostician with the Orleans Parish School Board District, and Emma Merrill, who is the director of the Orleans Parish's first newcomer high school, and they are here with us today. So if you would come sit next to Shannon in case there are implementation questions from the superintendents that we need help on. And I really do say that these two this has been a multi-year process for them, and we are incredibly grateful for all the work that they have put into this, because they just kept their students front and center and would not give up.
And then while they're coming up and you guys are identifying what questions you have, I want to share my perspective. So I'm at 11 years, 6 months, and 8 days on Bessie. I'll be finished with 12 years at the end of the month. And this is certainly a shift in where I've been on the board. I do want to just help you, I want you to understand where the shift is for me. So for the last 3 years, I've had the opportunity to sit in the role as a principal, and I've been looking at transcripts. And one of the things that concerns me is when we have children taking the same test 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times. So that bothers me on a lot of levels, right? But what I want you to know is that I feel like all of our students should continue to take tests. I feel like our tests help us, and I know we're better now than where we were when I first got on Bessie. However, I feel like we need to open up opportunities for our educators to shift some of the supports they're providing to students, and this appeals process would do this, right? You have a student who comes in, takes English 1, does not pass it their freshman year. You can do the intervention that summer. They can try and take that test again, right? They can go and do English 2. They can try to take that test again if they don't pass. And frankly, it's up to you as to how many times that you want to test a child. So we don't put limits on that, although I will tell you one of the things I learned in this process is that the state of New York does. What I would encourage you to do, and what I hope to see, and I feel like we're going to see in best practices, is that when we're seeing over and over again students who are not passing these standardized tests, that we start having more in-depth conversations about their future, right? When I have a child who hasn't passed biology tell me that they want to be a veterinarian, I really struggle. And so, but I think it's because the adults in that person's life have not had realistic conversations with them. Now, if you want to be a veterinarian, I'm not saying that field is closed to you. Maybe you're just not ready yet, and I should shift and start thinking about vet tech for you. Because if you can't pass biology in high school, becoming a vet is not a realistic goal. We need to help our children have realistic goals, and we need to connect our children to opportunities to be able to realize those realistic goals. If you read this policy before you came in today, one of the components is for our students to have a meeting scheduled with a Workforce Innovation Opportunities Act provider, right? So I had a principal say, I don't know who that is. I told him, I can help you. I'll text you a cell number, right? You will be able to do this. So this is going to put into place a requirement for educators to work with people in the industry to get children connected to opportunities outside of graduation. I know we all hear a lot about redesigning high schools. I think this is a place where we can start, where we can be very concrete and specific and support our students in opportunities that once they walk across that stage, they're walking into an opportunity in our community. When these children, the other side of this is these children do not graduate from high school and they become dropouts. They're contributing to disconnected youth. Now, I have a biblical worldview, right? There's so much about the Bible that's right. One of the things about the Bible is that we're all given gifts. And the gifts that we have, when we use them, make a difference in our own lives, but it makes a difference in our community. I feel like where we are right now is we're blocking children from having opportunities in their community. And so that's why I'm here. These ladies did all the legwork on this, right? But I can tell you, I see the kids every day, and I know we have to do a better job of connecting kids to real opportunities when they walk off our stage. And the last thing we should do is be blocking them from opportunities of actually successfully graduating from high school. Thank you.
And just to follow up with that, like as we were thinking about this and how to implement it, we tried to be really cognizant of the demands that are already there on schools and their leaders. And we tried to structure this appeals process using resources and structures that already exist in your schools. You have those SBLC teams that are already supposed to be the group that is meeting with children that are struggling on their EOCs. And so this gives them, right, greater power in this process to be able to help guide students through the high school path that is going to help them the most. And we think that with the reorganization of the end of course exams, mostly to your freshman and sophomore year, right? I know that the high school civics piece doesn't have to be in a given year, but so by sophomore year, you've got a good idea of where this school is or the student is, and you've got 2 years, right, to try to help them pass that EOC that they're missing through these interventions. But if that does not work, you also have the time to get them that industry-based credential or to work with them on their work keys to be able to allow them to avail themselves of this process. And we're not under any illusions that every kid is going to do this, right? Because this is work, right? And it's going to take commitment on the part of the student, right, to want to do this. But what I do think it does is it gives a student hope that at the end of the sophomore year, when they are failing their end of course exams, I mean, I cannot imagine that so many of them just want to give up because they're like, how am I ever going to graduate high school? Why do I want to spend the next 2 years when I know I'm not going to get my diploma? And this gives them a pathway of hope that if they do what they need to do and they show that they're proficient outside of that end of course exam, that there is a path to graduation for them. So questions, I know y'all must have a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Ms. Alexander.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I think this is the right path to be on. I really do. I think that giving our students opportunity, I think the data is compelling that I didn't even know that you brought here today from Texas. I mean, I do believe there's opportunities for our students who can't pass a biology or civics or U.S. history tests, but did well in maybe math and maybe not even well, but at least hit approaching basic in math and English at one of those series tests. I can't find anything wrong with this, and I think the rigor around the portfolio makes a lot of sense. And there's still I love the employability side of it. And I think when you think about even universities are looking at changing their standards around acceptance, where it used to be a hard line on certain SAT and ACT scores, they're factoring in other considerations. I think it aligns well with even those kind of things. So I'm just going to say that I'm in favor of this.
I want to piggyback on that. I really appreciate the research and especially looking at other state models for this. That's really great information. And I do want to lift up a concept of portrait of a graduate because that baby who wants to be a veterinarian and can't pass biology, that didn't happen in high school. And so I do think that as we continue to think about how we improve outcomes for our scholars beyond high school, that we own the fact that it starts much earlier than high school. And then my second piece, we've got an amazing partnership with Youth Force NOLA, and they just do some incredible work to support us as we're making sure our scholars have opportunities for workforce development, credentialing, and so forth. And just wanted to ask a question that they lifted up to see if we can get a little clarity. The proposed policy asserts that both portfolio work and a standard assessment are measures of content proficiency. If both of these options assess knowledge at the same content standards, why does the policy require students who graduate with a portfolio of work to also demonstrate employability? This suggests that the portfolio of work is less rigorous and that the career pathway programs of study that prepare young people for employability are less rigorous than the core academic pathways. And this is from the perspective of people who are really leaning into the employability piece. Can you just kind of unpack that a bit?
I sure can. So I am the principal at the W.D. and Mary Baker Smith Career Center in Lafayette. And the purpose here is more around additional opportunities for students. So it's not a rub against either one or another pathway for students to take, but it's all about how many options can we open for students when they're walking across the stage. And one of the things about the beauty of my role is I went to school, I always knew I was going to be an educator, right? Like there was no question about it. And, but I had this opportunity where I was out recruiting and met a teacher who thought she wanted to be a nurse, did CNA in high school. When she was in college, was able to get paid as a CNA, which was much better than my minimum wage job. And through that process learned, wait a minute, I think I'd rather be a teacher. And so it's more about adding options for kids and knowing that the more they know about themselves and the more they know about the community and the more ways that they're able to contribute, the better everybody is. So it's not meant to be a rub against either or, but it's just saying, because let's look at it this way, right? Like you all know your RTI data. You've got 80% of the kids that are getting your regular instruction, that kind of thing. Then you've got the 15% of the kids who are maybe in your tier 2. I mean, these are really tier 3 kids. These are the kids who need above and beyond all the other things. Our estimate is around like a 5%, right? And if we see a district that is graduating people with 10% of students on this, then there's something that someone needs to talk about. So that would, of course, they would be audited. But this whole notion that 5% needs more, and this is a way to give more. It's also just this personal bias that believes the more we work with kids and give them skills early on, the better off everybody's going to be. So it's more of a multiplier and not meant to subtract from anything.
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say kudos. I think this will be a game changer for the state. So I've worked, I came from other places. This is not new, this portfolio concept. I think the question is that I think will make a huge shift in terms of access and opportunity for kids. I do know, I'm a big believer in assessments too in terms of a diagnostic. I don't think they should be the gatekeeper of a child into X, Y, or Z. There's plenty of research across the country, especially when you look at physicians and attorneys and those folks who took LSATs, MCAT for medical schools, especially for black and brown kids, like University of Chicago's work, that there's a lot of those kids, especially when you look at the historical black universities, that have had those students go there because their scores are not as high as the other predominantly white institutions. Those kids are still lawyers and doctors, and they didn't score the highest on those entrance exams walking in. But we tend to use that as a predictor, as I've noticed, as we get closer to more in the K-12 space. I do think assessments help for diagnostic, but I think that they are not the predictor. I think what I also love is I heard David was saying is connected to a job. Depending on which child you talk to coming from what home, I tell folks in my house, it wasn't a love of reading, it was love to get a job, right? And so that's the cultural space my family came from. So I think that we providing more opportunities for that in a way that keeps the rigor still high, making sure kids learn is a huge thing. I'm excited about this because I feel it's going to take us to a whole nother space as a state, because I do think sometimes there are some things we created barriers in the space of trying to create rigor. I mean, East Baton Region, we've been pushing pathways work to provide access for kids that are required to take advanced courses, be industry-based certification. And it'd be interesting as you listen to different families coming from different homes, how that interpretation happens depending on who you're talking to, who has access, who doesn't have access. And so, I mean, for us, I think it's going to be huge. I think it's going to make a tremendous difference in a lot of different ways. When you look at some of the top 5 states in the country that perform much higher than us, they have the portfolio in place. They've been doing it for years, right? And so I just think that this is going to really be huge for us in a lot of different ways. We have all the tools here to be a top state for that.
I don't know if it's too early, but I would like to make a motion to endorse the ASL appeals process, exclusive learning investing, and passing policy.
I have a few questions.
I have more discussion before.
Yeah.
Mr. Alexander, because
So we have a substitute motion in a second.
did you actually make it? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, well, I mean, we can add.
Well, I just didn't know if discussion had been finished yet before that motion could. So I'm okay? Okay. All right, so first of all, I agree with many of the superintendents. I think it's a phenomenal idea with the way that the structure is currently, our accountability system and our ESSA plan that's submitted to the federal government is currently outlined. However, we don't take advantage of as a state, and I know discussion has been brought before Bessie, before, is the actual requirement of high school, that this isn't even necessarily a requirement to have 6 end-of-course tests. So has there, and I know there's been discussion with Bessie in regards to that, and you made reference to it in one of your slides, that we're one of only 8 states left that actually require the end-of-course test. So wouldn't it, and I'm not detracting away from your recommendation for this policy change, because I think it's great based on our structure, but the more important question is, in my personal opinion, is whether or not our current ESSA plan is the appropriate plan as a state that we should have, and whether or not that should drive the discussion of a portfolio and or other innovative assessments. You know, we talk about the soft skill competencies, those future ready competencies, which are as important sometimes as a score on an end of course test. Should that potentially not be the center of discussion, knowing that this is our current policy and we're trying to change that?
So I think it would be, I mean, you're going to have a majority new Bessie coming next year. So when we look at the scope of where we are, I mean, a lot of this comes out of the COVID waivers and understanding exactly where the data is. So for a long time, this was masked. It's not something I saw, right? And so in the amount of time we have left with the board, I think this is the right way to focus. I think also this is a very student-centered policy, right? This is not a school district-centered policy. This is a kid-focused policy. What you're talking about is a much larger, requires a much larger scale change. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I have 6 votes to do this on Bessie next week, right? And I'm sure you know there's no salary or benefits associated with this job. So to go and try to do something, but there are a whole lot of text messages and phone calls associated with it. So to go to do something that you don't think is gonna move is a really hard, right? Like, I'm just like, what do we have the room and space to do? And I don't know that we have the 6 votes to even do this, as while it looks like, and I'm hoping for unanimous endorsement of this proposal, and I wanna thank both of these gentlemen for that motion, that it's like what's possible in the amount of time that we actually have. So this is where we are.
And I will say, just surrounding soft skills, I'm on the committee that looks at our Jumpstart pathways and the industry-based credentials. And there is a lot of discussion going on that committee about how we can figure out how to have IBCs and other assessments that try to account for soft skills among students, because we do know that that's of increasing importance. And so we're in the middle of the struggle around that. And so we know that we need to be doing more of that for our students, and we're trying to figure that out.
And that Youth Force NOLA is coming to Lafayette, and I'm going to learn all I can about it. And if there's statewide implications, I am rolling off of Bessie, but I'm not moving, right? So I promise that I'll add, as I learn, continue to add to those discussions.
And I'll say, as it relates to ESSA, my interpretation is that ESSA is our plan to address the subgroup performance on the assessments, not necessarily around graduation requirements. And I know that letter grades are part of the ESSA plan, but just a small piece of it. And this is more about graduating than it is about assessments.
If this fails by 1 vote, I'm calling you, sir, to come back here and vote.
Oh, yes. My question is only because we were at our regional meeting and we brought up this topic, and I did bring it out to our superintendents, and one of their questions was, and so I feel like I have to ask this, is when you talk about EOC scores, is there going to be a minimum of how many times a kid needs to take the test? In the sense of, because there are concerns where you still have EOCs that are part of teacher advantage scores. You got EOCs that And so, not really digging into the weeds, but that was one of the superintendent's questions is, are we going, I mean, is a kid going, we don't want kids who, I failed at one time, and you know what, I'm moving to the world, I'm just gonna do a portfolio. And so, that was one of their questions is, are there going to be some minimums, very similar to when we did alternative assessment at day 33, kids had to take a certain number of time. So I just want to bring that concern from other superintendents. I 100% agree and endorse this, but that is a concern. Are there going to be some factors that are easier for a school to say, yes, we're now moving into this process. We don't want kids just skipping it.
So if you all feel like we have to add that to the policy, then that's certainly a conversation we can have. I don't know what the research says about the right amount of times for a child to take a test, right? I mean, in my mind, a child would take it at least 2, but I feel like, you know, when Bessie's silent on policy, that means it's at your discretion in terms of what you think is best and what you think is best for a child. I mean, I'd hate to make a minimum of 2, and then you find out that maybe 3 would have been better for certain situations. And so, unless you all direct us to add a minimum or a maximum, it's just something that I don't feel like I know enough at this time to be able to say has to be in that policy.
And I was just gonna say, we looked into that as well, as part of the policy,
So it's not,
and, I'm sorry.
no, I was just saying, the band scores are such only for initial testers. So the number of times they take it after that doesn't affect them.
Right, so the legal requirement is still to take it.
No, only the initial test counts. In band.
That's correct.
Right. Is that fine?
That's correct.
Okay, so only, so it won't affect band at all.
Okay, go ahead, Emma.
I was just gonna say that we looked into like the legal requirements, and a child still must take it, and of course, right, and then with their remedial hours, to retry the test again. So there must be twice, like.
So we do have twice.
We do have that twice,
Yes.
yes.
Okay.
Because inside the documentation, like, you require the SBLC to talk about the results of the intervention, right? So that we can look to say that those 30 hours that were spent, right, the easiest way for a district to show the results of that intervention is that second DOC, right, to look at whether or not progress was made.
But if you tell us that there would be a game changer if we required them to take it 3 times, we're completely open to that. 2's good for you, got it.
It's answered in one of the questions there. It says that after the initial test, 30 hours remediation, and then tested a second time, which I think that should be done, because as Tommy was saying, you know, you don't want them to say, well, I can just do a portfolio and get through this. And then again, y'all showed evidence that the portfolio is not necessarily a stamp all. You do have to meet certain rigor of that in order to get the way.
First, I just want to commend everyone on the work to put this together because it's pretty solid. When we start looking at what our district has in terms of the EL population, and this is how we were first introduced to it, to where that can be a big help for our kids. Many of our kids can't pass it because of the language barrier itself. So this really promotes a lot of what we should be doing for kids. The fact that we're saying that this is student focused should drive a lot of the conversation, so I'm glad that that is the conversation. But I think by us having all of these rigorous requirements, because the conversation came up whether we do one or the other or both, I think both should stay in place, because if you look at opponents, the first thing they're going to say is exactly what you're pointing out, is like, how do we stop students or districts from gaming the system, to where the kids are not required to pass the test and just say, okay, I'll just go with the portfolio. So it would be, important for us to have something that's just as rigorous, just another format to test the skills and quality of our students. So when people are starting to try to counter why we're doing this, it really does become, it's not the fact that we're going to a watered down process. It's just another process that's equally as rigorous, just another way of determining whether or not the kids have the skills necessary for them to be considered a graduate. So I guess my question is, if this kid does go through the process, takes all the tests that they're supposed to do, have to go through the portfolio process, how does that impact accountability? Are they still considered an on-time graduate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So I have like the in the weeds type questions.
I probably won't be the one to answer that.
But you have to.
All right, so.
I can make stuff up.
So what, so I just need some clarity first. So is this born from the issue with our EL kids? Is that where this comes from? So you all are, this is good for you all? Because I'm thinking about.
They wrote it,
You did? Okay, because my question is, so when a kid, in order to, for graduation requirements, you just have to score an approaching basic on one of, the two tests, right? So what you're saying with the portfolio, they have to earn, how are you gonna determine what's proficient? Because it says creating a portfolio work aligned to the standards of both, what's gonna be the cutoff? What is it? What do they have to score on the portfolio, on now 2 portfolios, in order to consider meeting the graduation requirement?
We worked on the scoring and like the portfolio requirements for 3 exams, so we could cover each pair. And so have one in your packet for algebra, for biology, and for English 1. I think, Truba, do you want to speak to the scoring? Because you know more about that.
So I think in the policy it says LD standardized rubric, and we're hoping that, should this pass next week, that that's in place for this upcoming year. We just did a draft rubric for one subject for each of the buckets as an exemplar. I'm not sure if that's included in the packet. And then we also left it to where, like for example, for Algebra 1, our suggestion was 5 type 1 tasks for every major content area, 1 type 2 task for expressing mathematical reasoning, 1 type 3 task, modeling application, right? So it's like product requirements, but it gives, LEAs the flexibility to either complete these as formative assessments in an on-level course, or as part of the 30 hours in remediation, or as a concurrent intervention. So I think depending on local context, like when the portfolio is done, right, that can be a local decision, but the rubric itself is standardized.
So who's going to do the scoring?
The SBLC committee is the decision maker in the process.
So the
Yes.
districts will do the scoring?
The schools, the SBL, school-based level.
Right, so it'll be at the district to do the scoring, and then we just submit the information to the department, and then they would count toward, well, the initial doesn't matter, but they would count toward the graduation, meeting the graduation requirement.
They would be graduates, yes.
They would be graduates. And so if they would be graduates, so they would be counted just as how would they be counted in? I'm looking right now in my mind's eye, the SPS calculator. Where would they fall on that portion of it? Like, where would they go?
Right.
They'd be in a graduate, and in a graduate, they would be scored what, depending on what IDC they receive? Because they have to get an IDC, right?
Well, I am not an SPS expert, but what I can, so this is a student, we were really intentional, because I don't know if you saw, but no accountability proposal's been getting 6 votes on Bessie. So this is a student-specific policy. The implication for your SPS is connected to their graduation. So when a child graduates, let's say they graduate and they had also had level 2 in welding, well, that's a 150 in strength of diploma that you wouldn't have gotten if they weren't a graduate. So if they graduate with additional aspects that they would have gotten if they would have passed the LEAD test, then they would have factored in multiple places in school performance.
It would be on those 2 indicators. The cohort grad rate, and then you look at strength of diploma, it's where they fall on the current. And we know we're going to probably have a new formula after last year, but it would not count positively in any of the LEAD assessment indices, or the ACT index, or the interest in opportunities. So we don't.
Well, unless the child made the ACT.
The what?
Right. I mean, the child.
Well, if they make that ACT, that would count. If they make above 18, 19, 20 right now. Which is the majority. In other words, this process would not raise their score in any of those other indices, like
Right, it
LEAP
doesn't change
assessment.
the LEAP assessment score.
It won't change LEAP assessment, won't change ACT index, won't change inter-child performance. Or it won't change progress.
You only got dinged on my freshman year. You got
Dr.
dinged
Joseph
on
still
my
has
sophomore year. You got dinged again in junior.
Zero ACT.
Hey, Dr. Joseph, I think they're hungry.
So when they have, so they can only do it, or appeal during their senior year, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so when they appeal it during their senior year, that means that they have taken a test and failed it again, right?
Yes, they've taken a test, they failed it. They've had at least 30 hours of intervention and failed the test a second time.
And failed the test the second time in their senior year, so that puts them.
No, they don't have to do all the testing in their senior year, right? But let's say you get to your senior year and you haven't made the cut. Thank you. Let's say in your senior year, you haven't made the score you needed in the, we'll say, U.S. History Biology pair, U.S. History soon to be Civics pair, right? Like by the time you get to be a senior, you have not made those, you've taken both, you've remediated both, and tested a second time, then you could apply.
Gotcha, so I have my whole senior year to do those portfolios.
You do, but you can work that portfolio development into the course or into the intervention. You don't have to wait until the senior year to build the portfolio. So what we didn't want is kids like, I'm not taking any LEAP assessments, I'm not taking those serious, and starting that stuff as a sophomore year. I mean, a lot of you guys have electronic portfolios where you would be able to capture work and those types of things. So just, trying to think about everything here.
Gotcha, because I have a kid right now, he came to us his senior year.
Right.
And in his other school, he's taken that one test like 5 times. So now here he is, can't graduate because he hasn't passed that test yet.
This
So
would
now
help
it's
that
like, what
child.
do I do with that kid, right? And if he had this opportunity, would it be beneficial for him?
Yes.
Just need to start working that.
You have to start early, right? Well, at this point, you know what I'm saying?
Well, there's actually part of this policy that would allow it to benefit that particular child, Dr. Joseph. Because for kids who weren't captured in the class of 2023, if you can get the child to come back to campus to do those things, and have people say, well, the kids aren't in school anymore, the educators aren't going to do that. I've seen educators make a whole bunch of sacrifices and create all kind of bridges that would be possible. And so the way this policy is written is that if that was a would-be 2023 graduate, it would apply to that child.
Just a point of like logistical clarity, right? So if I'm sworn unsat on the English 1 EOC, but I passed class, even though it's part of my final grade, I did well enough in English 1, I passed, I'm moving on to English 2. Same thing happens. I pass English 2, but I swore unsat on that test. We're not saying you have to remediate 30 hours in both courses, both tests. I just want to make sure that I understand.
Yeah, that's it.
There is a point where I'm trying to pass one of those two, right? And if I don't want a portfolio kicked out. I mean, we're going to probably double down on the English 1 side, maybe, or something like that. I don't know, so.
Did we say they have to remediate both? We have in the policy right now that you have to remediate both. But I also am telling you, I need 6 votes on Bessie. So I'm trying to make this as solid as possible,
And we know, that this will be, it will be a lift for the school and it'll be a lift for the student, right? But that this is a way for them to achieve a diploma, but it is going to require work from them. And we need to be able to show to people that are going to argue, that this is watering down, that we're serious about the hours being put in. And our hope, like we said, is that you do those 30 hours of remediation after English 1, and they move up and they're able to pass, and then this becomes, a moot point for them.
And then there is the piece about the portfolio requirements in English 1 and English 2, right? So you would want to do that intervention and that second test anyway.
That makes sense. Thank you.
This is not watered down at all. This is watered.
Just a real quick question, I'm sure you've already looked into this, but my understanding is the state law governs the graduation requirements. This appeals process can run parallel to that. We're good to go?
Yes, so Bessie is the one that actually wrote the graduation requirements for students. So if you go look in statute, and if you find it, call me, because I can't find in statute anywhere the assessment requirements. The department did put out a letter saying that they don't think Bessie can do this. We disagree, and we have a letter from our attorney saying that we can. So I feel like Bessie can write an appeals process for policies that Bessie writes.
A second.
Are you gonna pass the letter out? Thank you.
I just think it's important to note that we had a lot of discussion at our last SAC meeting around this. And I think the major concern was we were only discussing a certain or a specific population of students. But I think what this has created is an avenue for now all students to be able to achieve graduation, and not in an easy mechanism, but one that really is truly going to ultimately be rigorous for that student. And they're going to be required to put in a lot of work to do that. So kudos to these two young ladies for bringing forth something specific around ELL, but kudos to Bessie for considering all Louisiana students.
We get those emails from the parents saying, my kid missed the test by 1 point, what can be done? And our response is nothing. And your child can walk, but participate in the ceremonies, but that's just, not everybody allows for that.
Now you can say a lot of work can be done, but they can still graduate, but it'll take a lot of work.
All for questions.
Any other comments? Okay. We have a substitute motion, Mr. Alexander, and second by Dr. Williams for, oh, you
So,
want to speak?
yes,
Yes.
sorry.
We've just prepared some short words. Truva.
So Emma's going to speak onto how this appeals process was centered around the student experience. I just want to quickly speak to the school-based staff perspective. And just to assure folks that this is not a heavy lift on schools or any individuals that are school-based. This was very intentionally aligned to processes that already exist in schools, right? We know that SBLC teams are already a function that exists to meet on student-specific, situations, right? That ABC, attendance, behavior, course performance data, right? And to meet regularly to monitor that progress. And then the interventions required for students to appeal are also identical to the interventions required for students who are T9, right? I already spoke around the portfolio requirements being flexible to local decision around when the portfolio requirement is fulfilled. And then the evidence of employability, like the great things we're already doing to prepare students for industry-based credentials, right? Preparing them for the work keys through technical writing, business English courses. And then I also want to speak to the fact that the appeals process actually is going to address the intersection of a lot of other challenges, right? So the possibility of appeals allows us as school-based personnel to have more intentionality and purpose in designing the high school experience of the student. Instead of scheduling a student 3 times for biology, watching them lose their love for learning, miss more days of school, and then now we have a truancy situation. I can keep that student engaged by helping them create a tangible work product, right, that shows content proficiency. And then, with that career counseling, help them choose what industry-based pathway they want to go on, having them complete that credential that allows for concrete success and a feasible path forward. And it addresses that intersection of students who are not, meeting that assessment threshold, because they're also probably not meeting the assessment threshold for pass as well, right? And so this gives those students a path forward as well, still having us serve those students with excellence. And I do want to say that I don't think it's a coincidence that in 2021, we had 84% of students in Louisiana graduate. In the inverse, right, 16%, that same year we also had 16% disconnected youth, 16 to 24. The exact inverse, right? These are students who are not enrolled, not employed. So this appeals process, right, allows us to lean on processes already happening in schools, the expertise of staff in the building, and allows us to have a pathway for all students that are in our buildings.
Take our best, what you got.
And we've each mentioned like experience with this with a high schooler. I'm just gonna bring it back to one student that a lot of this has based my work off of. Her name is Mary. She came to the United States having completed her freshman year in Vietnam and had 3 years to go until graduation. In her first year, she told me, "Miss Merrill, I will accomplish your goal of growing 2 years in English this year and I will surpass it." And she did, right? By the end of that first year, she received a 3, an intermediate level of English proficiency on our exam. And for context here, most native-born students would receive about a level 4. She was a shining star. She excelled in writing narratives, solving mathematical equations, and wanted to be a doctor. And she even received a mastery on her geometry exam, right? We know that some students excel in some subjects more than others. But by her senior year, she still had not passed her biology LEAP exam, even after taking the test 3 times. I started to see her losing her spark and her enthusiasm for learning. She didn't greet me with a smile in the mornings anymore. And when she turned in one of her English proficiency essays, I became worried because she wrote, "Sometimes I think about killing myself." This is one of the scariest moments you can experience as a teacher. We went through all the correct channels, right? Setting her up with school social workers, a local psychologist, and I even texted her in the evenings telling her how proud I was of her because she said nights were the hardest. She retested on the biology and U.S. History LEAP in May of her senior year, and she failed both. She was within 3 points of passing biology LEAP. She could not walk across the stage with her peers or receive her diploma. I told her I wanted her to come to summer school to give it one more go, and she refused. She said she needed to be done with the exam for her own mental health, and I couldn't argue with that. I've changed the name of my student to protect her anonymity, but her story is not unique. As you heard, 4% in students in 2019 and 7% of students in 2022 did not graduate because of this exam, and students walk into our schools with dreams and plans and leave sometimes feeling crushed and disheartened solely due to a score on a test. This is something we need to change, and we're letting test scores define their identities, and that needs to change. 3 years ago, I started Louisiana's first newcomer high school because I recognize the need for our students who are newcomers to get explicit language and content instruction in a manner different from their peers. I got this idea from other states, right? California, Texas, Colorado, Minnesota, Virginia. We're doing the same with this policy today. We're using those as a model to create pathways for students who need it. With this policy, Mary could have had a career in healthcare, maybe not as a doctor, like we stated earlier. She also could have gained a healthcare industry-based credential, and then gone to a local community college that would have placed her in the healthcare pathway. She's currently making minimum wage in a nail salon. Don't maintain the status quo. Work together to continue building and growing our educational system and serve all students, each and every one. Thank you.
So we have a substitute motion to endorse item 4.2 motion by Mr. Alexander, second by Dr. Williams. Any opposition? Hearing none, motion carried.
That concludes your agenda.
That concludes our agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.